The terrorist commander seized the American intelligence officer by the hair and drove the pistol barrel so hard into her temple that she cried out. He didn't flinch. He laughed the deep, satisfied laugh of a man who had already won. 20 armed fighters behind him, high ground, hostages, a Delta Force team pinned flat in the open, bleeding, unable to move. He screamed into the mountain air, "Throw down your weapons, or she dies in 10 seconds. He was already counting. 9, 8, 7. What he never knew, what none of them ever figured out, was that a 25-year-old girl from Montana had been watching him through a scope for 40 minutes, and she had already decided exactly how this ended. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started, because nothing about this day was supposed to go the way it did. I want to tell you something I've never told anyone outside the community. There are moments in combat, real combat, not the kind you see in movies where everything slows down so completely that you can hear your own heartbeat between the seconds, where the world narrows to a single point and every choice you've ever made, every hour you've ever trained, every doubt anyone has ever pushed into your chest, all of it collapses into one breath. I've had a few of those moments in my career, but the one I keep coming back to, the one that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, sometimes isn't one of mine. It belongs to a 25-year-old girl from Billings, Montana, who most of us never expected to make it through the first hour. Her name is Specialist Emily Carter. And I'm telling you right now, before I even get into what happened up on that mountain, that woman is the most naturally gifted combat sniper I have ever seen operate in a live environment. Not the best trained, not the most experienced, the most gifted. And there is a difference, a big one. But none of us knew that on the morning this story begins. None of us wanted to know. That's the part I'm ashamed of. I was the senior NCO running Overwatch coordination for that mission. I was the one who looked at Emily Carter's assignment paperwork the night before and said out loud in front of 3 other veterans, "You've got to be kidding me." I was the one who made sure she heard it. I wanted her to hear it. I thought it would light a fire under her, make her sharpen up, prepare herself for the reality of what was coming. That's what I told myself. But if I'm being honest with you, and I'm going to be, because this story doesn't work any other way, I just didn't believe she belonged there. She was too quiet, too calm. She didn't talk like we talked, didn't carry herself like we carried ourselves. In a room full of men who announced themselves through noise and posture, and war stories traded like currency, Emily Carter sat in the corner and drank her coffee and said almost nothing. And in my experience, the quiet ones in that context are either the most dangerous or the most unprepared. I assumed she was the latter. I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong. Let me take you back to the briefing room, because that's where this really starts. It was 48 hours before the operation. The entire task force was assembled in a secure conference room, buried 3 levels underground at a facility I'm not going to name. The mission commander, we called him Colonel Marcus, though that wasn't his real name, stood at the head of the table with that look he always got when the situation was worse than he was about to tell us. "Gentlemen," he said, and then he paused, looked at Emily and added, "and Specialist Carter." She didn't react, just kept her eyes on the tactical map he was about to pull up. Marcus began. Approximately 18 hours ago, a classified intelligence gathering station embedded inside a Rocky Mountain location was seized by a group we're currently identifying as a 20-plus hostile force. The station houses 9 American personnel, including 2 senior intelligence analysts and 1 field officer whose identity and access level I am not authorized to disclose in this room. "Wait," said Staff Sergeant Dolan, who was sitting 2 seats from me. 9 personnel, 20-plus hostiles, and they're still alive. "For now," Marcus said. "The hostiles appear to be stalling. We believe they're waiting for something, extraction, reinforcement, or a third option we haven't identified yet." "What's the approach?" I asked. Marcus pulled up the terrain map. 2-kilometer approach through exposed ridgeline. "There's a valley corridor here," he pointed, "that gives us concealment up to approximately 400 meters from the main structure. After that, it's open ground." Dolan leaned back in his chair. "Open ground against 20-plus armed hostiles who already know the terrain better than we do because they've been sitting in it for 18 hours. Yes, Marcus said flatly. So we're going in anyway. We're going in anyway. That's when the room shifted. You could feel it. Not fear. Delta operators don't wear fear on their faces, not in briefings, not with each other, but calculation. Everyone doing the math, everyone running the variables, everyone knowing that this kind of approach against a prepared defense force was exactly the kind of scenario that built memorials. I turned and looked at Emily Carter. She was still staring at the map. Not at the insertion point, not at the valley corridor. She was staring at the high ridgeline to the northeast, the position that wouldn't even be marked on the tactical overlay because it was nearly a mile from the target structure, outside the effective range of most operational scenarios. The kind of position that only matters if you're thinking in terms of long-range precision, the kind of thinking that most combat planners don't bother with because most snipers can't operate at that distance with the consistency you'd need in a real engagement. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask what she was looking at. I should have. The briefing continued for another 90 minutes. Assignments were handed out. Breach teams, assault elements, communication relays. When Marcus got to Overwatch, he looked directly at Emily. Specialist Carter, you're positioned here. He put his finger on the northeast ridgeline. Maximum standoff distance. You'll have a paired spotter, Sergeant Harris, from the support element. Yes, sir, Emily said. That was it. 2 words. Dolan caught my eye across the table and made a small gesture, a barely perceptible shake of his head that said everything we were both thinking. Harris was one of our best spotters. He was going to spend this mission babysitting a rookie who had never been downrange in a real engagement, and that meant a substantial fraction of our Overwatch capability was effectively neutralized before the operation even started. After the briefing, when most of the team had moved toward the equipment room to begin final prep, I caught Emily in the hallway. I said, Carter. She stopped and turned around. Those eyes, I've thought about this a lot since those eyes were completely level, not nervous, not eager to impress, just present, just waiting to hear what I had to say. You have any live fire combat experience, real combat, not ranges, not training rotations. No sergeant major. You understand what that means for tomorrow. I understand what it means. I leaned against the wall and looked at her for a moment. The veterans on this team have been running operations together for 3, 4, 5 years. We have a rhythm. We have shorthand. When things go sideways, and they will go sideways, they always go sideways. We adjust and we move without thinking because we've done it before. You haven't, which means you're going to think when you should be reacting, and in this environment, thinking gets people killed. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just looked at me and said quietly, I hear you, Sergeant Major, is that all? I should have said more. I should have actually talked to her, asked her about her training, her quals, her mindset going into this. Instead, I just said, don't let Harris babysit you more than he has to, and walked away. I was using the kind of tone you use when you've already written someone off. She knew it. She didn't flinch. That night, I moved through the equipment room doing final checks, and I passed by the area where Emily was staging her gear. She had her rifle broken down on the table, a D300 Winchester Magnum platform with a Schmidt and Bender scope that I recognize as one of the longer range configurations in our inventory. She was cleaning it with the kind of methodical, focused attention that you almost never see in someone before their first real operation. Most rookies are too wired, too amped moving fast because they think speed signals readiness. Emily moved like she had all the time in the world. Harris came up beside me and watched her for a second. Harris was ex-Ranger, 10 years of operational experience. The kind of man who could read a shooter's capability from 30 feet away just by watching how they handled their weapon. He said very quietly, she's got good hands. I said, she's got 0 trigger time. Yeah, Harris said, I know, but she's got good hands. I didn't want to hear it. I moved on. Insertion happened at 02:30 the following morning. The team moved through the mountain darkness in 2 separate elements. The assault force using the valley corridor as planned, and Emily and Harris taking a longer, steeper route to the northeast ridgeline. I was with the assault element positioned near the front of the stack, with Dolan and 2 other team leaders. The approach was clean for the first 400 meters. Cold air stars so bright they hurt to look at the sound of boots on frozen ground and nothing else. 400, our point man said over the comms. transitioning to open ground. Copy, Marcus said from the command element behind us. All elements status check. Overwatch status. Harris's voice came back, in position. Shooter is cold. Visibility is good. No active threats visible at this time. Cold meant Emily hadn't fired. Hadn't even chambered a round yet. Protocol. We began moving across the open ground. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. The facility was about 350 meters ahead. Low-profile structure partially built into the mountain. The intelligence station's designers had wanted it invisible from the air, and they'd succeeded. If you didn't know where to look, you wouldn't find it. Then Dolan said very quietly over the team channel, "I've got movement. Left side elevated position." Before any of us could respond, the world exploded. Heavy machine gun fire came from at least 3 separate positions. Elevated, suppressed, pre-sighted on exactly the open ground we were crossing. The math was immediate and brutal. They had known we were coming. They had positioned for this exact approach. The valley corridor was a kill box. I hit the ground before I consciously decided to move. Training, pure training. Around me, the assault force was going down. Not casualties, not yet, but every man flattening, seeking cover that didn't exist on open ground, pinned hard by interlocking fire from 3 angles. Contact, contact, contact. I was already transmitting. 3 gun positions, elevated left, elevated right, direct front. We are pinned. We cannot advance. Marcus's voice. Overwatch, do you have eyes? Harris, working it. Carter is acquiring standby. Standby. Dolan's voice was tight controlled, but I could hear something underneath it that I hadn't heard from him in years. We are pinned in the open, Harris. We need support now. Stand by, Harris repeated, and there was something in his voice that wasn't urgency. It was almost trust, like he'd seen something in the last 30 seconds that changed his calculus. I pressed myself against a shallow rock outcropping that gave me maybe 18 inches of cover and watched tracer fire cut above my head in long orange lines. The gun on the left was closest, maybe 250 from my position, elevated on a natural rock platform. The gunner was methodical, controlled, covering a wide sector. Taking him out without Overwatch was going to cost us at least 2 men. Overwatch, I called again, harder this time. We need. The left gun stopped. Just stopped. Mid-burst. The way a gun stops when the man behind it is no longer able to hold it. I didn't understand what had happened for almost 3 full seconds. Then I heard it, the delayed sonic crack of a high-velocity round arriving after the bullet itself. Nearly a mile away, Emily Carter had just reached out across almost a mile of mountain air and put a round through the primary gunner on that position. Left gun is down, I said, my voice sounding strange even to me. Overwatch confirm, Marcus said. Harris confirmed. Carter has solution on remaining 2 positions. The second gun cut out 40 seconds later. Then the third 12 seconds after that. In the space of less than 2 minutes, a 25-year-old woman from Montana who had never seen real combat had dismantled the ambush that should have destroyed us. The assault force started getting up from the ground. Around me, I could hear men moving, could hear Dolan calling fire team assignments, could hear the momentum of the operation reassembling itself from the rubble of what had looked 60 seconds ago like a catastrophe. I stood up slowly and looked northeast toward the ridgeline I couldn't see in the darkness. Harris, I said over the channel. Yeah. Is she okay? There was a pause. Then quieter, she's already looking for the next target. And that was the moment I began to understand that I had made a serious mistake in the hallway outside that briefing room. Not a small mistake, not a procedural error I could write off as standard operating skepticism. A real mistake, the kind that reveals something about a person, about the limits of what they can see, when they're too sure they have already figured something out. Emily Carter hadn't been sitting in that corner drinking coffee because she had nothing to offer. She'd been sitting there because she was watching, calculating, filing everything away. She'd been staring at the northeast ridgeline on that map because she'd already identified the only position on the entire battlefield that gave her the angles to protect us. She'd been cleaning that rifle with calm hands because she had already made peace with whatever was coming, and the peace she'd made with it wasn't resignation. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that just waits. And now the assault force was moving again, moving across the same ground that had been a kill box 3 minutes ago, moving with the confidence that comes from knowing there is someone watching, Someone eliminating threats before they even become visible, and not a single man on that team yet understood who was doing it. They thought it was Harris. They thought the veteran was carrying the rookie. That's what everyone thought. That's what made sense to everyone. And Emily Carter, from her position on the northeast ridgeline, with her eye behind a Schmidt and Bender scope, and the wind reading on her cheek and her spotter's voice in her ear, Emily Carter didn't say a word about it. She just kept working. There were 17 more threats still standing between us and the people we'd come to bring home. She was already deciding which order to take them in. 40 seconds into our resumed advance, one of our forward operators flagged a radio antenna on the south corner of the structure. The antenna meant an active communications element. Someone inside was broadcasting, calling for reinforcement, coordinating with assets outside our visibility. "We need that antenna down," Marcus said. I thought about our options. Direct assault on the comms position would expose the lead element to fire from the interior. Suppression was possible, but would take time we likely didn't have. And then the antenna folded clean. One round from a mile away through the cable junction where the transmission line met the base unit. Surgical, precise, exactly the kind of shot that requires not just ballistic skill, but an understanding of the architecture. An understanding of which component destroyed precisely renders the system inoperable without triggering any backup systems. "Comms are cut," Harris reported. "How is she doing that?" Dolan said it out loud, not on a channel, just to himself, standing 2 feet from me. I don't think he meant for me to hear it. "She's reading the battlefield," I said. He looked at me. "You knew she could do this." I said nothing. The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that I had dismissed her so completely the night before that I'd never allowed myself to consider what she might actually be capable of. And now she was carrying us, all of us, 12 heavily armed Delta operators, crossing contested ground toward a fortified structure. With a rifle she was running entirely on her own calculations, with environmental data. She was gathering herself, making decisions that most operators with 10 years of experience wouldn't have trusted themselves to make. The comms were cut. The machine guns were silent. And somewhere inside that facility, 20 terrorists who had spent 18 hours preparing an ambush that was supposed to erase an entire Delta Force team were beginning to realize that something had gone very, very wrong. They just couldn't figure out where it was coming from. That was by design. Emily Carter had chosen her position not just for sightline advantage, but for acoustic misdirection. The way sound travels between mountain faces. The way the crack and thump of a high-velocity round bounces between ridgelines, she had positioned herself so that every shot she fired sounded like it was coming from a different direction. The enemy wasn't searching one location, they were searching four. Harris told me this later, after everything was over, sitting in a debrief room with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup and a look on his face that I recognized because I've worn it myself, the look of a man who has just watched someone operate at a level that recalibrates his entire understanding of what's possible. "She explained it to me before we moved into position," Harris said. "The acoustic geometry. I thought she was being theoretical. You know how some shooters get in their own head about the science and forget about the execution? But she wasn't theorizing, she was planning. Every word she said about the sound patterns she executed exactly. To the meter. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Harris was quiet for a moment. "Then because I wasn't sure you'd listen." He was right, I wouldn't have. That's the part that sits heaviest with me when I think about that day. Not the close calls, not those moments where the math nearly didn't work in our favor, but the quiet arithmetic of my own failure to see what was right in front of me. A young woman with extraordinary capability, standing in a hallway, looking at me with level eyes while I talked to her like she was a liability. Back on the mountain, 3 minutes after the antenna went down, one of our reconnaissance elements flagged movement on the north perimeter. 2-man team drone operators with a portable launch system. If they got a bird in the air, they'd have visual on our entire force positions, movements, numbers, and they'd be transmitting that to someone. North perimeter, I broadcast. Drone team 2 hostiles. Before the acknowledgement even finished transmitting 2 shots. Sequential, 1.2 seconds apart. Both drone operators were down, and the launch system was destroyed by the second round. Emily had calculated the shot to take the operator out through the system, housing using the bullet's pass-through energy to disable the electronics. 2 threats neutralized equipment, destroyed 4 seconds, total elapsed. Dolan grabbed my arm. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed my arm and I felt the grip of a man who is recalculating something fundamental. Inside my headset very faintly I could hear Harris's voice on the Overwatch channel. He was talking to Emily. His tone wasn't the directive instructional voice of an experienced spotter managing a junior shooter. It was conversational, almost collaborative. I was saying, I've got a third element on the roofline east corner, looks like a mortar crew setting up. And Emily's voice, calm and very quiet, came back. I see them, give me 45 seconds. Wind's shifting from the northwest. I know, I've got it. 43 seconds later, the mortar crew on the east roofline ceased to exist as a tactical threat. She was 43 seconds ahead of the wind. There are snipers I've worked with who have years of high-value target experience who cannot do what Emily Carter did in those 43 seconds. The level of environmental integration, the instinctive correction for atmospheric change at that range, it isn't something you develop quickly. It isn't something most people develop at all. It's the kind of capability that shows up once in a generation in a person who was somehow built precisely for this one extraordinarily specific purpose. And the entire time the terrorists inside that facility were looking in the wrong direction. They sent a scout team out to check the southern ridgeline, the direction their instincts told them the fire was coming from. Emily watched the 4-man scout team deploy track them for 90 seconds and then reported their position to me calmly over the command channel. Command, I have a 4-man element moving south ridgeline 120 meters from your eastern perimeter. They're looking the wrong direction. Do you want me to redirect them or eliminate? I almost said redirect, because the idea of a 25-year-old in her first combat operation casually offering to eliminate a 4-man threat element as one of 2 options in the same tone you'd use to ask if someone wanted coffee was almost too much to process in real time. Eliminate, Marcus said without hesitation. 4 shots, 12 seconds. Scout team neutralized before they came within 500 meters of any American position. That's when the first radio intercept came through our signals element. One of the terrorists, we believed it was a deputy commander based on the frequency and encryption level, was broadcasting in a panicked, fragmented transmission. Our interpreter translated it in pieces over the next 30 seconds. Cannot locate the source. Multiple positions. It is not possible from this distance. We are being hunted by ghosts. Dolan heard the translation in his earpiece and turned to look at me. For the first time in years, Staff Sergeant Dolan, the man who had shaken his head in a briefing room 12 hours earlier when Emily's name came up, had nothing to say. I had nothing either, except that the woman we dismissed was systematically dismantling 20 armed terrorists who were now so confused and terrified that they were using the word ghosts in their tactical communications. And she was doing it from a position none of them could locate. And she was doing it entirely alone, with no wind calls from a spotter, no backup, no second shooter, running her own calculations on every variable, making decisions that would take most people 10 times as long, because up on that ridgeline, 55 minutes into the operation, something had changed. Harris had been hit. I didn't know it yet. None of us on the assault element knew it. The enemy counter-sniper, the one we'd missed in our intelligence assessment, the one positioned above and behind Emily's location, had found a partial angle through the terrain and put a round through the rocky cover Harris was using. Not a kill shot, but a serious wound. Harris was down out of the fight, pressing his hands against a wound that needed immediate care and doing the one thing a good combat operator does when he can no longer perform his function. He told Emily, "I'm hit," Harris said very quietly. "Left shoulder, I'm okay for now. But Carter, I can't call for you anymore. You are running solo." And Emily Carter, in her first real combat operation with her spotter down, with 12 lives depending on the precision of every decision she made, from that moment forward it said only, "Copy Harris. Stay low, I've got it." She was 25 years old. She was running a mile-long engagement against 19 remaining armed terrorists alone in shifting mountain wind, with no one left to verify her data. She was calm, and the assault force below her kept moving forward, unaware that the invisible shield protecting them had just lost its second set of eyes and was still holding. Harris's voice was still ringing in her ears. "I'm hit. I can't call for you anymore. You're running solo." Emily Carter did not panic. She did not freeze. She did not take even 3 seconds to process what that meant in terms of the math. what it cost her operationally to lose her spotter mid-engagement, what it meant to be alone on a ridgeline with no one to verify her wind data, no one to range new targets, no one to call splits or confirm kills. She just said, "Copy Harris, stay low, I've got it." And then she went back to work. That's the detail that still gets me when I think about it. Not the shooting, the going back to work. Because Harris going down wasn't a pause in the operation for Emily Carter. It was a variable. One more variable in an engagement that already had 100 of them, and she absorbed it the same way she'd absorbed the shifting mountain wind and the acoustic geometry and the 19 remaining targets still moving inside and around that facility. She filed it, she adjusted, and she kept her eye behind the scope. Down on the open ground below, the assault force had no idea. I was moving with Dolan's element about 220 meters from the facility perimeter when the next radio check came in from Overwatch. "Command Overwatch, I have a mortar crew repositioning to your northwest. 2 operators. They're setting up on the secondary platform." Marcus came back. "Can you engage?" "Already engaged. They're down." That fast. No conversation. No dramatic buildup. 2 men who were about to drop indirect fire on 12 American operators were neutralized before anyone on the assault force even had time to process the threat. And the voice coming through the headset was the same voice, the same steady, quiet, completely matter-of-fact tone that had been calling out targets for the last hour. Dolan moved up beside me and said very low, "How many is that now?" 11, I said. 11, he repeated. And then quietly enough that only I could hear, "Is Harris helping her?" I hesitated. "Harris is down." Dolan stopped walking. I kept moving. He caught up to me in 4 steps and grabbed my arm again, the same grip as before, except harder this time. "Say that again." Harris took a round. "Shoulder. He's out of the fight." Dolan's face went through something complicated. I watched it happen. The disbelief first, then the calculation, then something I can only describe as a forced recalibration. A man who had spent 20 years being right about things suddenly confronting evidence that he had been wrong about something that mattered. "She's running solo," he said. "She's running solo." From a mile out. From nearly a mile out, yes. He let go of my arm. He said nothing else. But I watched him look northeast toward the ridgeline he couldn't see, and I watched something shift in his expression that I don't have a precise word for. It wasn't guilt exactly, though. There was some of that. It was closer to the feeling you get when you realize the story you've been telling yourself about something turns out to have been wrong from the beginning, and everything you thought you understood has to be rebuilt from scratch. We kept moving. The facility was 180 meters away. The assault team was tightening the approach, fanning into the secondary formation. Marcus had briefed 2 breach elements converging on the main entry points, with a 3rd element covering the extraction corridor. The plan assumed overwatch suppression of any interior defenders who attempted to break out through secondary exits. That assumption was now resting entirely on a 25-year-old running solo from a position that most of our senior operators would have called operationally untenable for a single shooter. 3 minutes after Harris went down, Emily called in another target. "Command, I have 2 hostile scouts attempting to flank your eastern element. 70 meters, moving fast." "Eastern element, you have incoming flank 2 hostiles, 70 meters east," Marcus relayed. "Copy," came the eastern element leader's voice. And then, 2 seconds later, surprised, "Contact neutralized. Who took those shots?" "Overwatch," Marcus said. A pause on the channel. Overwatch hit a 70-meter flank target from their position. Nobody answered that. The math was uncomfortable and everyone knew it. From Emily's position on the northeast ridgeline, a 70-meter flanking target near our eastern element was an extraordinarily complex shot short range relative to her position, but the angle compression, the proximity to friendly forces, the speed of the moving targets, and the requirement for perfect identification before firing all combined into a calculation that gave most snipers nightmares. Emily had processed it in real time, confirmed the targets, and fired twice in under 2 seconds. I heard one of the younger operators on the eastern element mutter very quietly, "What is happening right now?" I understood the feeling. At the 58-minute mark of the operation, the assault force reached breach distance, 60 meters from the main entry. The plan was holding barely stitched together by a combination of Delta professionalism and one woman on a ridgeline who was doing the work of a 3-person Overwatch team by herself. Marcus called it breaching in 90 seconds. All elements confirm ready. The confirmations came in, every element ready, every team leader calling in green. And then Emily's voice cut across the channel, and it was the first time since Harris went down that something in her tone had changed. Not panic. Emily Carter didn't panic. But there was a precision to her words, a compression that told me she was working a problem that required everything she had. Command, I have something. Northwest ridgeline, high position. I've been tracking an anomaly for 4 minutes. I'm now confident. There is an enemy sniper positioned at elevation northwest, directly overlooking the breach point. The channel went very quiet. Say again, Overwatch, Marcus said. Enemy counter sniper, northwest, elevated. He has direct sight line to your breach point. If your teams are in the open at that entry for more than 3 seconds, he has kill shots on at least 4 operators. Dolan looked at me. She's been tracking him for 4 minutes without saying anything. She wanted to be sure, I said. That's a 4-minute hold under fire. Yes, it is. Marcus was already thinking through options. Overwatch, can you engage the counter sniper? Another pause, shorter this time. His position is partially masked. I have a partial angle on his firing aperture. If he moves, I'll have a shot, but I cannot take the shot until he reveals himself, and he reveals himself by firing. Which means we have to give him a target, Marcus said. The math on that was brutal, and everyone on the channel understood it immediately. To flush the enemy sniper into a firing position, we had to expose something he would commit to shooting at. And whatever we exposed had to be real enough that he would take the shot, because a seasoned counter sniper wouldn't break cover for a decoy he recognized as a decoy. I'll cross the breach point, I said. Negative, Marcus said immediately. Marcus? I said negative, Sergeant Major. We're not running suicide decoys. It's not suicide if she's watching. That silence on the channel lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like a full minute. Then Emily's voice, give me the position and the timing. If he fires, I'll have the shot before the round reaches you. Before the round, Dolan started. She can't intercept a bullet, Marcus said. She means she'll take the shot in the window between his firing and his round reaching the target, I said. She's talking about less than a second. Another silence. Then Emily, steady as ever, I can do it. But I need you to move in exactly the pattern I give you. Don't improvise. I said, tell me the pattern. She talked me through it in less than 45 seconds. Speed, direction, distance, precise timing on my movement relative to the sight line, angles she had already calculated. She had worked this out. She had been working it out for the last 4 minutes while she tracked the counter sniper's position while she simultaneously monitored 19 other threats across the battlefield. She had planned for this moment before it happened. I moved. I crossed the breach point at exactly the speed and angle Emily had specified in the pattern she had described, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth, knowing that somewhere up on that northwest ridgeline, a man with a rifle was watching me and deciding whether this was worth breaking cover for. He decided it was. The crack of his shot reached me as a pressure wave against my left cheek, close, very close. The round impacted the rock face to my right, 18 inches from my position. And before the echo had finished bouncing between the mountain faces, Emily Carter's return shot hit the enemy sniper's firing aperture at nearly a mile of distance and ended the threat permanently. She had fired in the window between his muzzle flash and his round reaching its target. I stood at the breach point with dust from a near miss settling on my sleeve and felt my legs do something they very rarely do in combat, which is threaten to stop functioning properly. Target down, Emily reported. Northwest counter, sniper is eliminated. Breach point is clear. Marcus's voice was unusually quiet when he came back on the channel. Copy, Overwatch. All elements execute. The breach happened in the next 40 seconds. Clean, fast, professional, the way Delta works when they've trained together long enough that the mechanics are automatic. 2 teams through 2 entry points, movement through the interior corridors, communication in quick, short bursts of compressed information. But what was happening outside, what the assault force was still only partly tracking, was an operation Emily Carter was running simultaneously to their breach. Because the breach itself pushed the remaining hostile fighters toward exterior positions, and those exterior positions were exactly the angles she was covering. When the first 3 defenders broke from the north exit trying to establish an exterior flanking position, Emily had already identified them on their exit route. 3 shots in just over 4 seconds, all 3 down before they cleared the perimeter. When a radio operator sprinted for a secondary communications relay mounted 200 meters east of the main structure, Emily saw him at the moment he started running and put a round through the relay unit. At the exact moment he arrived to use it, the impact destroying the equipment and simultaneously communicating to everyone still alive inside that the perimeter was being actively denied by an overwatch position they still could not locate. That radio intercept came through again. Our signals interpreter's voice was tighter this time. The words are coming fast. They're asking each other where it's coming from. One of the commanders is ordering everyone inside. He's saying it's safer inside. He's saying whoever is out there can't shoot through walls. He's right about that, Dolan said, which means he's going to get every remaining fighter inside and make us breach room by room. Or Marcus said, he's going to use the hostages as a buffer. We all heard it at the same time, that shift in the mission's gravity. The terrorists were adapting. They were recognizing that the exterior battlefield was lost and moving to the interior dynamic that was always the most dangerous phase of any hostage rescue. The phase where the bad guys make a human shield and wait to see if you care more about your people or theirs. The breach teams were 45 seconds into the interior when the activity stopped. Not went quiet, stopped. The way a room stops when someone has made a decision. Marcus's voice on the command channel was controlled, but I knew him well enough to hear the tension underneath it. Breach teams report. We've got something, came the lead breacher's voice. Main corridor, we're holding. Reason, a pause. They've consolidated around the hostages. All remaining fighters, what looks like 7, maybe 8. They're in the main operations room with all 9 American personnel. They have the room locked down. There's no approach angle that doesn't expose the hostages. 7 to 8 fighters, 9 American hostages. A locked room with no clean approach. That was the situation at the 1 hour, 8 minute mark. And then the door to the main operations room opened and everything changed. The terrorist commander, the one who had set this entire trap, who had spent 18 hours preparing a mission that was supposed to end with 12 American operators dead, walked out into the corridor. And he had one of the American intelligence officers with him. Her hands were bound. He had his pistol pressed to her head, and he was smiling. He walked her all the way outside through a secondary exit. The breach teams couldn't follow without exposing the other hostages, and he put her in the open ground in front of the facility where every American position could see them clearly, and he started talking. His voice carried in the mountain air. Our interpreter was translating in real time. He says he knows there is a sniper. He knows there is someone watching. He says his fighter was killed. He knows. The interpreter's voice broke slightly. He says if the sniper fires, he kills her. He says he wants every American to come out in the open. He says he'll execute her in 60 seconds if he doesn't see them. I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. Neither of us had a clean answer. If we complied, we walked our operators back into the open kill zone, the same ground. Those machine guns had been covering 70 minutes ago, and we didn't know how many shooters were still positioned in those elevated spots. If we didn't comply, we watched a hostage executed. Overwatch, Marcus said quietly. I need options. Emily's voice came back immediately. I have eyes on the commander. Sightline is clear, but the only shot available is on the weapon itself. The hostage's position blocks all center mass angles. Say that again. The pistol. I have an angle on the pistol. If I hit the frame correctly, I can destroy it before he can fire. But the margin is extremely narrow. The wind has shifted twice in the last 4 minutes. Dolan was beside me. That's impossible, he said. It wasn't a challenge. It was an observation delivered honestly from a man who knew ballistics. At this range, Emily said, in current conditions, the probability is not 0. Oh, not 0. That was her answer, not 0. I thought about the 4-minute hold she'd run on the counter sniper. I thought about the 43-second wind adjustment on the mortar crew. I thought about the acoustic geometry she'd designed before the operation even started. I thought about Harris saying she's got good hands in the equipment room and me walking away from it. Marcus, I said. I heard her, Marcus said. 20 seconds of silence on the command channel. 20 seconds that felt like standing inside a stopped clock. Then Marcus said, Overwatch, you have authorization. The terrorist commander was still talking, still walking the hostage forward. He'd gotten to about 30 seconds on his count. When Emily Carter settled her, her breathing accounted for a wind shift she'd been tracking for the last 4 minutes, held on a target that most combat snipers wouldn't even classify as a viable shot at standard ranges, let alone from nearly a mile away, and she squeezed the trigger. The pistol disintegrated. The commander's hand was empty. The hostage stumbled forward unhurt. The commander looked at his hand with an expression that our interpreter, who was watching through binoculars, later described as complete incomprehension. Like a man who had encountered a natural law, he had no framework to understand. The assault teams were already moving through the interior. The moment the threat to the hostage was neutralized, Marcus's people executed the secondary breach with the kind of precision that comes from absolute certainty that the exterior is covered. 7 remaining fighters inside were taken down in 80 seconds. None of the American personnel were harmed. Outside, the commander was still standing there, looking at his empty hand, when 2 members of the breach team came around the corner and zip-tied his wrists. Over the command channel, I heard one of the breach team members say very quietly to no one in particular, "Did Overwatch just shoot the gun out of his hand from a mile away?" Nobody answered him. The silence was its own kind of answer. But that wasn't the end of it. That's the part everyone focuses on: the shot that destroyed the pistol, the hostage walking away, unhurt, the breach team coming through the door. That's the story that spread through the community in the weeks after the one that became the thing people referenced when Emily's name came up. What most people don't talk about is what happened in the next 8 minutes. Because while the breach team was clearing the interior and the commander was being restrained and the hostages were beginning to be extracted, Emily Carter was still on the northeast ridgeline, and she was scanning, not celebrating, not standing down, not even taking a breath, scanning, because 11 enemies were confirmed down. 3 had been eliminated on the exterior. During the breach, 3 more went down on the exit route, and the math for Emily Carter said there were still active threats unaccounted for. She was right. At the 1 hour, 14-minute mark, 3 minutes after the pistol shot, Emily's voice came on the channel, and it was the first time since Harris went down that I heard something in her tone that was close to urgency. "Command, I have a thermal signature on the northwest ridgeline, elevated stationary above the position where I eliminated the counter-sniper. The signature is not the counter-sniper, different position, different profile. I am looking at a second dedicated shooter, and he has been stationary for over an hour. He was there when we inserted. Marcus, he waited out the entire operation. He's been watching, not engaging, watching." Dolan beside me very quietly. He was documenting, building a target file. "On what?" I said. "On her." The realization moved through me like cold water. The second sniper wasn't there to engage our assault force. He'd been there to identify, locate, and eliminate our Overwatch specifically. He'd been there because the terrorist command knew there might be a counter-sniper problem, and they'd assigned a dedicated asset to solve it. An asset disciplined enough to hold position for over an hour, watching and waiting, building the precise shooting solution he needed. I had been hunting Emily the entire time, and now he was ready. "Carter," Marcus said hard and fast, "relocate now." "If I relocate, I lose my sight line on the extraction corridor," Emily said. "There are 3 hostages still in the transition from interior to exterior. I lose the corridor, they're exposed." "Carter, give me 2 minutes," she said. "I'll have it worked out." 2 minutes. 2 minutes while a trained enemy sniper who had spent 60-plus minutes building a firing solution was sitting on a hide above the northwest ridgeline with a rifle pointed in her general direction, tightening his search pattern, using every piece of information he had gathered through an hour of patient observation to narrow down her position. 2 minutes while 3 American hostages were moving through an exposed transition point. 2 minutes while the entire outcome of the operation balanced on the decision of a 25-year-old woman from Montana who had been running solo for the last 57 minutes. "Talk to me, Overwatch," I said, not Marcus. "Me," I said it before I thought about it. "What are you working?" Her voice came back without hesitation. "He's good. He's very good. He's narrowed me to a general quadrant, and he's tightening. He's going to have a firing solution in approximately 90 seconds. But his position has a geometry problem. The rock formation above him creates a backscatter issue on his left side. He can't see it from where he is, but I can see it from where I am. If he moves to refine his position, he has to shift left. And when he shifts left, he gives me a window. How long a window? I asked. Half a second. Maybe. And if he doesn't shift? Silence. 2 seconds of silence, that was its own answer. He'll shift, Emily said. He has to. His current position doesn't give him a precise enough angle. He knows that. He's going to move. How do you know? I asked, and I wasn't challenging her. I genuinely wanted to understand. Because she said very quietly, I'd move. The channel went silent again. I stood in the shadow of the facility exterior and watched the extraction corridor where 3 Americans were being walked out by breach team members, and I listened to the sound of mountain wind in my headset, and I thought about a girl in a briefing room staring at a map while everyone else looked at the valley corridor. She'd already been thinking about this shot. She'd already known, not specifically, not with the details she had now, but in the broad architecture of the battlefield, that there would be a counter-sniper problem, and that the counter-sniper problem would eventually become a sniper duel, and that the sniper duel would happen on terrain where the geometry favored whoever understood it better. She had chosen the northeast ridgeline for 3 separate reasons: the sight lines, the acoustics, and the angle it gave her on the northwest rock formation and its back scatter problem. She had been thinking about this shot since before the operation started. The second enemy sniper moved. He shifted left exactly as Emily had said he would, refining his position, closing the last gap in his firing solution. And in the half-second window that the movement created, Emily Carter fired. 1 round, clean, final. The last dedicated threat to the Overwatch position was eliminated. Target down, Emily said. Her voice had not changed. Same tone, same tempo, same compression of information into the minimum words necessary. The 3 hostages cleared the extraction corridor and made contact with the medical element. All personnel accounted for, the medical team lead reported. 9 American nationals, all alive, all mobile. Dolan sat down on the ground right where he was standing. Just sat down. A 12-year Delta Force veteran sat down in the dirt outside a classified intelligence facility in the Rocky Mountains and put his hands on his knees and looked at the ground for a moment. I didn't say anything to him. I understood the feeling completely. Marcus's voice came through the channel, and I could hear something in it that Marcus almost never let people hear: genuine emotion, compressed and controlled, but unmistakably there. Overwatch status. Emily, Overwatch is secure. Harris needs medical. I've kept pressure on the wound. He's stable. Copy. Hold position. Extraction is inbound. Copy. And then after a pause that I think even Marcus needed, just to breathe for a second, he said, outstanding work, Overwatch. Nothing elaborate, no speech. Just those 2 words spoken by a man who did not give that kind of acknowledgement casually ever. She had taken down 14 confirmed threats since Harris went down. 14 individual high-stakes shooting solutions, each one run entirely on her own calculations in shifting wind on terrain she'd studied for 48 hours but never stood on before this mission, with a rifle she'd been given 72 hours earlier in the first real combat engagement of her life. 19 targets total, 1 pistol destroyed, 1 enemy counter-sniper duel won, 3 ambush gun positions eliminated, drone teams, radio operators, mortar crews, scout elements, flanking threats, all of it handled before any of it became the catastrophe it was trying to become. When the extraction helicopters came in 22 minutes later, I walked toward the landing zone with Dolan and 2 other team leaders and watched them settle into the mountain air. And I thought about what I'd said in that hallway the night before, about thinking when you should be reacting, about rhythm, about belonging. Dolan walked beside me for 100 meters without speaking. Then he said, quiet enough that the rotor wash almost took the words away, "We owe her an apology." "We do," I said. "You think she wants it." I thought about the corner of the briefing room, the coffee cup, the level eyes, the complete absence of any need for our validation, our recognition, our retroactive understanding of who she was. "No," I said, "I don't think she does." Dolan nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I didn't think so either." Emily Carter came off the ridgeline with Harris's arm over her shoulder, his weight against hers, moving with the same methodical pace she used for everything. When the medical team reached them at the perimeter edge, she transferred Harris, carefully answered the medic's questions concisely, and then stood alone for a moment with her rifle across her back and looked out at the mountain. I was 30 feet away. I watched her do it. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't processing, not visibly. She was just looking. The way you at something when you finished a very hard thing and you want a moment to let it be finished before the world comes rushing back in. Again, I started walking toward her. She heard me and turned, and those same level eyes were there, the same ones from the hallway the night before looking at me. The way they had looked at me then, without anger, without vindication, without any need for me to say the thing I was about to say. I said it anyway. I owed it to both of us. Carter, Sergeant Major. I stopped a few feet from her and looked at her for a moment. 14 hours ago, I had talked to her like a liability. I had been so thoroughly wrong that I didn't have language for how wrong I had been. Good shooting today, I said. It wasn't enough. We both knew it wasn't enough. But it was honest, and it was the beginning of something. And Emily Carter, who had just spent 67 minutes alone, on a ridge carrying the lives of 12 men on every trigger pull, looked at me for a beat and then gave a very small nod. Thank you, Sergeant Major. 2 words, same as the night before. Except these 2 words carried the full weight of everything that had happened since, and we both felt it, and neither of us said anything else. And somehow that was exactly right. Behind us, the helicopters were spooling up. The team was loading. 9 Americans who had spent 18 hours as hostages were wrapped in thermal blankets and moving toward the birds with the careful coordination of people who can't quite believe they're standing upright. And the veterans of the Delta Force assault team, the men who had arrived on this mountain the night before, absolutely certain they understood everything they needed to understand about the person assigned to their overwatch, climbed aboard those helicopters with a fundamental piece of their certainty permanently removed. They were quiet, every one of them. The kind of quiet that comes when a lesson has been delivered, not by words, but by reality in full, without mercy, without apology, without a single moment of drama or announcement. Just 19 threats eliminated, every American alive. One rookie nobody trusted who had turned out to be the most important person on the battlefield. The helicopters lifted. Emily Carter sat in the back. Harris's bandaged shoulder against the fuselage, her rifle across her knees, her eyes closed. Not sleeping, not resting. Just finished for now with the extraordinary and exhausting work of being exactly who she actually was, whether anyone believed it or not. The helicopters touched down at the forward operating base at 0611 hours. 67 minutes of combat, 19 threats eliminated, 9 hostages recovered, every American operator alive. On paper, it looked clean. It was not clean. The medical team met the birds the second the skids hit the ground, pulling Harris out first, getting IVs started, calling vitals, and clipped professional shorthand that carried underneath it the particular tension of people who knew the man they were working on. Harris was conscious talking, making the kind of dark jokes that combat medics learn to interpret as a good sign. His shoulder was a mess, but the round had missed the subclavian artery by margins that the surgeon would later describe as either extraordinary luck or extraordinary body positioning. And Harris, when told this, said it was the latter because he had trained for exactly that, and if anyone tried to call it luck, he would find them. Emily walked off the helicopter on her own. Rifle slung, pack on, moving the same way she always moved, deliberate, unhurried, taking up no more space than she needed. The debrief started 40 minutes later in a secured room that smelled like old coffee and dry erase marker. Marcus sat at the head of the table. The assault team leads filled in around him. Emily sat at the far end, her hands folded on the table in front of her, the same posture she'd had in the original briefing room 48 hours ago. Everything was the same, except nothing was the same. Marcus went through the operational timeline methodically the way he always did, building from insertion to extraction, in sequence noting decision points and outcomes and variance from plan. He had done this after every operation for 11 years. His voice was the same flat professional register it always was. But when he got to the Overwatch section, when he started reading the confirmed engagement log, the room got very quiet. 19 confirmed hostile eliminations. 14 of those after the spotter went down. Engagement ranges between 400 and 1,600 meters. Environmental conditions including wind shifts of up to 12 miles per hour, temperature drop of 8 degrees during the operational window, and atmospheric pressure variance consistent with mountain elevation changes. He read it straight, no commentary, just the numbers. When he finished, he looked up and let the silence sit for about 5 full seconds. Then he said, "Specialist Carter, I want your account starting from the moment Sergeant Harris was wounded." Emily nodded and started talking. Precise, chronological. She walked through each engagement decision, each environmental calculation, each targeting priority she had established, and the reasoning behind it. She spoke for 11 minutes without stopping, without referring to notes, without emotion, and without detachment. Just honest, clean, professional accounting of what she had done and why she had done it. When she finished, Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The pistol shot." She met his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Walk me through the decision process on that." Emily was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, not hesitation thinking. There was a difference and everyone in the room had learned to read it. "The commander's body position gave me a partial angle on the weapon frame," she said. "A center mass shot was not available without unacceptable risk to the hostage. The hostage's proximity to the commander's right side closed that angle completely. But the weapon itself, specifically the frame just forward of the cylinder, was exposed for approximately 4 inches at the angle I had. Wind had shifted northwest. I'd been tracking the shift for 4 minutes and had a reliable read on the pattern. At that range in those conditions, a 4-inch target requires a firing solution that doesn't allow for error. But the alternative was watching a hostage executed in the open while her entire rescue force stood inside effective range and couldn't take a shot. "So you took it," Marcus said. "I took it," Emily said. Dolan, sitting 2 seats from me, leaned forward with his forearms on the table. "What was your confidence level on the shot?" Emily looked at him. "High enough," she said. "That's not a number." "No," she said, "it's not." Dolan held her gaze for a moment. Then he sat back, not satisfied exactly, but understanding something that hadn't translated into a number and perhaps couldn't. I had been watching the room for the last 11 minutes, and what I saw was something I hadn't seen in a long time in a space like this. A group of extremely experienced, extremely capable operators recalibrating in real time. The kind of recalibration that happens when someone has demonstrated capability that exceeds the framework you were using to evaluate them. They weren't deflated, they weren't defensive, they were genuinely trying to understand what they had just witnessed and finding that the understanding kept requiring them to expand the container. Marcus moved to the counter-sniper engagement. Emily walked through it the same way, methodical, clear, honest about the timing, honest about the margin. When she described the 4-minute hold while she tracked the secondary sniper's position, one of the assault team leads, a 12-year veteran named Kowalski, who rarely spoke in debriefs, said quietly, "You held for 4 minutes under a known counter-sniper threat without breaking position or calling it in." "I called it in when I was confident," Emily said. "Not before." "Why not before?" "Because if I called it in at the anomaly stage before I had confirmation, the command element then would have had to make decisions based on incomplete information. I didn't want to create uncertainty in the middle of a breach operation unless I was certain the threat was real." Kowalski stared at her. "You absorbed the operational risk on yourself to protect the command element's decision quality." Emily blinked once. "Yes." The room was quiet again, the quieter kind of quiet. Marcus closed his folder. He looked at Emily the way he looked at things he was still working out and said, "You'll be in the written citation for this operation, the full account, on the record." "Thank you, sir," Emily said. "Don't thank me," Marcus said. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm doing the record a favor." That was the end of the brief. People stood, gathered their materials, moved toward the door. The usual low conversations, the post-operation compression, where bodies and minds start to understand that the acute phase is over and the processing phase is beginning. I was almost out the door when Dolan fell in beside me and said without preamble, "I owe her an apology." "I told you that 40 minutes ago," I said. "I know. I needed the debrief first. I needed to hear it in sequence." He paused. When she described the 4-minute hold, the reasoning behind why she didn't call it in until she was certain I'd been operating for 12 years, and I don't know if I would have made that call. "She made it on her first operation," I said. "I know," Dolan said. "That's what I'm sitting with." I went back into the room. I watched through the glass panel in the door as he walked up to Emily and said something. She listened. She nodded once. She said something back. He extended his hand and she shook it, and then she turned back to packing her notes and he came back out and we didn't discuss it further. Some things don't need to be discussed further. That should have been the end of part 3. That should have been the clean resolution, the mission complete, the team debriefed. The credit appropriately acknowledged Emily Carter's extraordinary performance. locked into the official record and the community's memory. Except something was wrong, and the thing that was wrong had been wrong since before the helicopters landed, and none of us had seen it because we had been too focused on what had gone right to examine what didn't add up. The intelligence officer. Her name was listed in the operational brief as Agent Diana Reeves, Senior Field Officer, 15 years with the intelligence community. One of the 9 hostages recovered from the facility. She had been the one the terrorist commander used as the human shield, the one Emily had freed with the pistol shot. In the helicopter on the flight back, I had been 3 feet from Reeves. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket, sitting with her eyes closed, breathing slowly and carefully. I had assumed she was in shock. 18 hours as a hostage threatened, at gunpoint, the trauma of the pistol shot, in the breach, in the rapid extraction shock was a reasonable response. But she wasn't shaking. That was the thing I hadn't registered in the moment. People in genuine shock shake. Not always dramatically, but the body has a physiological response to extreme stress that is difficult to suppress completely. Reeves wasn't shaking. She was breathing like a woman doing a breathing exercise. Controlled, deliberate, like someone who was managing their external presentation very carefully. I turned this over in my mind for 2 days. Said nothing. Because saying something meant either being right, which would mean a catastrophic intelligence failure, or being wrong, which would mean accusing a 15-year senior field officer of complicity in a terrorist operation with no evidence, beyond a breathing pattern and an absence of trembling. The thing that pushed me across the line was the weapons manifest. At the 72-hour post-operation mark, our signals intelligence team completed their analysis of the communications intercepts from the facility. Most of it confirmed what we already knew. The terrorist force had been tipped off about our approach route, hence the prepared ambush. They had known our insertion timing within a 30-minute window. They had known the composition of our force. That level of operational intelligence about a classified mission with compartmentalized planning indicated an inside source, which was not by itself unusual. Inside sources were a known risk category, and investigating them was a standard post-operation protocol. What was not standard was what signals found in the secondary intercept file. A communication encrypted differently from all the others sent from inside the facility approximately 40 minutes before our insertion. The sender's communication pattern matched the terminal assigned to Agent Diana Reeves. Marcus called me into his office at 0800 on the 3rd day. He had the intercept analysis on his desk. He looked at me the way he looked at things that required him to be very controlled. "Tell me you see what I see," he said. "I see it," I said. "How long have you been sitting on it?" 2 days. "You should have brought it to me." "I know, I was hoping I was wrong." Marcus sat back. He said nothing for a moment. The kind of nothing that isn't empty, that's full of the weight of what has to happen next. "She's in protective custody at the facility," he said. "Standard post-rescue protocol. She can't go anywhere without an escort." "That's something," I said. "It's not enough," Marcus said, "because there's a second part to the intercept analysis." He turned the folder toward me. I read the second section. Then I read it again. The communication Reeves had sent 40 minutes before our insertion had not been a warning about our approach. It had been a location confirmation, a coordinate set for something buried inside the mountain. Something the intercept analyst had cross-referenced against geological survey data for the area and identified as a network of Cold War-era tunnel systems running beneath the facility's foundation. The tunnels were as the operational brief as a historical footnote. Decommissioned, sealed, not a tactical consideration. The intercept suggested they were not sealed. "She wasn't a hostage," I said. "No," Marcus said. "She wasn't." I put the folder down. "She orchestrated it." Marcus nodded once, very slowly. "The working theory is that she identified our team as the primary investigation risk the unit, most likely to be assigned if there was a follow-up operation into the weapons network using those tunnels. She arranged the seizure. She arranged the ambush to eliminate the team. And when the ambush failed," he stopped. "When Emily took the ambush apart," I said. "When Emily took the ambush apart," Marcus agreed. "Reeves had to adjust. The hostage positioning the pistol at her own head. Our analyst thinks that was improvised. She was buying time for reinforcements coming through the tunnels." I sat very still. If the pistol shot had failed, if Carter had missed or chosen not to take the shot, Marcus said, Reeves walks her captors toward our assault team under a flag of ceasefire. The tunnel reinforcements emerge, and we have 12 American operators surrounded by a force we weren't prepared for. Emily didn't miss, I said. No, Marcus said. She didn't. He closed the folder. He looked at me for a long moment. What would have happened on this mission without Specialist Carter? I already knew the answer. I'd been knowing it for 72 hours, but I said it out loud because Marcus needed to hear it said, and so did I. The ambush would have held. We'd have had multiple casualties in the open ground, maybe more. The breach would have been compromised or aborted, and Reeves would have walked away clean with an entire Delta Force team eliminated and a weapons network intact. Marcus was quiet. Then, get Carter in here. I found Emily in the equipment bay running a functions check on her rifle with the same methodical calm she applied to everything. I said, Marcus wants you, now. She looked up, read something in my face, set the rifle down and stood up. In Marcus's office, he walked her through it the same way he'd walked me through it. The intercept, the tunnel network, the working theory on Reeves. He was direct and he was complete and he didn't soften any of it. Emily listened with her hands folded and her eyes level, and when he finished, she said, the pistol shot. Yes, Marcus said. She was counting on me not taking it. Emily said, it wasn't a question. Or counting on you missing, Marcus said. Emily was quiet for a moment. The breathing, she said. Both Marcus and I looked at her. In the scope, when I had the solution on the pistol, she wasn't shaking. Someone genuine at gunpoint after 18 hours at the moment. A firearm is pressed to their head, the body responds. Small involuntary movements. Breathing changes. I registered it in the scope, but I filed it under stress management. Some people have extraordinary control under duress. She paused. I should have flagged it. You had other priorities, Marcus said. Still, she said, that single word, not self-flagellation, not performative guilt, just the honest acknowledgement of a detail she had registered and not followed, held without drama and without excuse. What happens now? Emily asked. Reeves is being moved to a secure location for formal interrogation, Marcus said. The tunnel network is being assessed. We'll know more in the next 24 hours. And the weapons cache, Marcus looked at her carefully. How do you know about a weapons cache? Emily said, the intercept coordinates you described are consistent with a storage class installation. And a network that went to this much trouble, compromising a senior field officer, orchestrating a facility, seizure, preparing a 20-man force, doesn't do that for an empty tunnel. Marcus held her gaze for 3 full seconds. You're right, he said. There's a pattern, significant. We're still assessing the scope. Emily nodded once. Marcus said, you'll be part of the follow-on assessment team. That was a significant statement. Follow-on assessment teams for weapons network discoveries were not typically constituted with specialist-level personnel. They were senior operators, intelligence analysts, strategic planners. The invitation was Marcus's way of saying something he wasn't going to say out loud in a formal setting. Emily understood. She said, yes, sir, and that was that. She was almost to the door when Marcus said, Carter. She stopped, turned. The name the team has been using since we got back. He paused. Ghost. Emily said nothing. You know about it, Marcus said. Harris mentioned it, she said. Does it bother you? She considered that for a moment. Genuinely considered it the way she considered everything completely without performance. No, she said. It doesn't bother me. Good, Marcus said. And then very quietly, because you earned it. She left. Marcus looked at the closed door for a moment and then looked back at his folder, and that was the end of the conversation. The name had started on the helicopter, apparently. The signals interpreter, a young staff sergeant named Park, who had spent the entire operation monitoring terrorist radio traffic, had been the one who told the assault team what the enemy fighters were saying in their communications. The word they used, ghost, multiple positions, impossible distances, coming from everywhere, a shadow that cannot be located. Park had said it in the aircraft to the operator sitting across from him. They called her a ghost. And the operator, Kowalski, it turned out, had looked at Emily sitting at the other end of the helicopter with her eyes closed and her rifle across her knees, and he had not said anything, but he had stored it. By the time the debrief ended, the entire team knew. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a ceremony of it. It moved the way genuine things move in tight communities, through implication and recognition, through the understanding that something has happened that is worth marking, even if you don't quite have words for the marking. Ghost. In the special operations community, a name like that is not assigned. It cannot be granted or given or decreed. It accretes, builds up over time through accumulated evidence until the weight of it becomes undeniable, and the name becomes simply the most accurate description available. For Emily Carter, the accretion happened in 67 minutes. But the weight of those 67 minutes was not 67 minutes of work. It was 25 years of Montana mornings and long-range ranges and the kind of quiet, relentless self-investment that doesn't announce itself and doesn't require validation and doesn't stop just because nobody is watching. The veterans on that team came back from that mountain with a piece of their certainty permanently removed. And what grew in its place slowly, unevenly, the way important things usually grow, was something more honest than certainty. Something that could look at a person in a briefing room corner and understand that a quiet level gaze and a methodical cleaning motion and two-word answers might carry more operational weight than everything else in the room combined. At the 48-hour post-operation mark, Diana Reeves was transferred to a secure interrogation facility by two agents whose names and faces are not relevant to this story. The transfer happened without incident, or so everyone believed. At the 72-hour mark, our forward communications relay picked up an anomalous signal from the mountain, a short-burst encrypted transmission originating from inside the tunnel network, which should have been impossible because the tunnel network access points had been sealed, physically sealed within 6 hours of the intercept analysis. Sealed does not mean monitored. Marcus had the signal decoded within 4 hours. What it contained was a coordinate update and a timeline, the kind of communication that tells people who are waiting that the timeline has changed and here is the new one. Someone was still active inside the tunnel network, and the timeline in that transmission corresponded to exactly 48 hours from the time of transmission, which meant whatever Reeves had set in motion, whatever the full scope of the operation was beyond the elimination of our team, was not over. It had been delayed by the mission's failure, but the network she had been serving was alive and operational and had simply reset to a new schedule. 48 hours. Marcus put the folder on the table in front of the assembled team leads and said, "We're going back." Nobody spoke. Then Dolan said, "Composition?" "Smaller," Marcus said. "Faster. We don't need 20 operators for a tunnel network. We need 6, and we need Overwatch." Everyone looked at Emily. She was already looking at the geological survey map Marcus had spread across the table, the same way she had looked at the tactical map in the original briefing room. Not at the tunnel entry points everyone else was looking at the terrain above them, at the angles. Finding the position that only made sense if you were thinking about this specific problem from this specific distance, with this specific level of understanding of how mountain terrain and acoustic geometry and enemy psychology all interacted. She looked up and found Marcus watching her. "I need to see the full intercept," she said. "The secondary communication. The one that wasn't in the first analysis package." Marcus said, "There is no secondary communication." "There will be," Emily said. "They've reset the timeline. They'll send a confirmation burst at some point in the next 12 hours. Standard network protocol for a compromised operation. You confirm the new window before you commit resources to it." Marcus was very still. "How do you know that?" Emily said, "Because if I were running a network and my primary operation had just failed and I'd reset the timeline, I would want a confirmation that the assets on the other end of the tunnel received the update before I sent anyone in." "That's intelligence analysis," Dolan said. That's pattern thinking," Emily said. "It's the same as reading wind." The room was quiet. Then Marcus said, "Park." Park, the signals interpreter, was in the adjoining room. He came in immediately. "I need continuous monitoring on every frequency associated with the mountain facility, starting now," Marcus said. "Any burst transmission, any anomalous signal, anything." "Yes, sir." Park left. Marcus looked at Emily. "If you're right, we'll know inside 12 hours. "Yes," Emily said. "And if you're wrong," she met his eyes, "then I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong." She wasn't wrong. 8 hours and 43 minutes later, at 03:47 in the morning, Park knocked on the operations room door with a signal intercept in his hand and a look on his face that said he was still processing what he was holding. The confirmation burst had come through exactly as Emily predicted. Same encryption profile, same origin point inside the tunnel network. And this time the decoded content wasn't just a timeline, it was a personnel list. 3 names. 2 of them were flagged immediately by Marcus's intelligence counterparts as known operatives in the regional weapons network, people who had been on watch lists for years without a confirmed location. The 3rd name was new, unknown, no existing file. But Emily was looking at it, and something in her expression had changed for the first time since this entire operation began. Not alarm, Emily didn't alarm easily, but recognition. The particular look of someone who has seen a piece of information that connects to something they've been holding in another part of their mind. Carter, Marcus said. She looked up. The 3rd name, she said. Can you run a cross-check against the facility's internal personnel logs? Not the official manifest. The digital access log. Every badge swipe, every terminal login, every physical access record for the last 6 months. Marcus made a call. The data came back in 22 minutes. The 3rd name appeared in the access log 47 times in the past 6 months. Not as a visitor, not as a contractor, as a registered user with Tier 2 clearance who had accessed the facility's lower levels, specifically the sealed section that corresponded to the tunnel network access points, 11 times in the past 3 months. The name belonged to a facility maintenance supervisor, who was currently sitting in the forward operating base common room, having been evacuated with the rest of the non-operational staff when the facility was seized. Sitting 60 meters from where Emily Carter was standing, Marcus picked up the phone. Emily was already moving toward the door. Carter, Marcus said sharply. Wait, she stopped. You are not going alone, he said. I'm not going to confront him, Emily said. I'm going to sit in the same room and watch him for the next 6 minutes and tell you whether he knows we have the intercept. Marcus looked at her. If he knows, Emily said, he'll have a way to communicate that to the network. And whatever that communication method is, we need to see it before we take him into custody. Because his communication method is how we find the network's other exit point. Nobody in the room spoke. Marcus said 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Emily said. She went. She came back in exactly 5 minutes and 40 seconds. She sat down across from Marcus and said, he knows. He has a phone, not his issued device, a secondary unit in his left jacket pocket. He's been checking it every 90 seconds. He's waiting for something. A signal that the network received the confirmation burst, Dolan said. Or a signal that we have the intercept and he needs to run, Emily said. Either way, the moment he moves for that phone, we need to be ready to copy whatever he sends before he knows we've got him. Marcus nodded at Park. The next 11 minutes were very quiet and very tense. The maintenance supervisor sat in the common room and checked his watch and didn't touch his food. At the 11-minute mark, he reached into his left jacket pocket. Park had the transmission copied in 4 seconds. 2 minutes later, the supervisor was in custody. The copied transmission went to Marcus's intelligence team and came back with a decoded location in 40 minutes. Not a tunnel exit, something better. A physical coordination point, a specific location, a specific time where the network's field assets were expected to appear for the weapons transfer that had been the entire point of this operation from the beginning, 24 hours from now. Which meant the follow-on operation Marcus had been planning for a tunnel or network assault had just become something different, not a defensive clearing operation, an offensive one. They had the location, the time, and the personnel list. All they needed now was the team and the overwatch. Marcus looked at Emily across the operations room table. She had been awake for, by his count, approximately 61 of the last 72 hours. She had run a 67-minute combat engagement that by any objective measure should have been beyond the operational scope of her experience and rank. She had identified the Reeves deception through pattern analysis that his senior intelligence staff had missed. She had predicted the confirmation burst transmission to within an 8-hour window. And she had just spent 6 minutes in a room with a network operative and come back with actionable intelligence that had potentially broken open the entire operation. She was 25 years old. She was waiting for him to say something. He said, "Get some sleep, Carter. We brief in 12 hours. She stood, picked up her notes, headed for the door. Then she stopped, turned, said, "Colonel." He looked up. "Reeves," Emily said. "She'll talk to me." Marcus said, "What makes you say that?" Emily said, "Because she's been running a network for a long time, which means she's very good at reading people. and she knows you have something on her. And people like that, people who have been calculating and controlling everything for a very long time, when they know the calculation is over, they don't want to talk to authority. They want to talk to someone who surprised them. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment. And you surprised her. She watched me take that shot, Emily said. She knows what it cost. She knows what it meant. She's been thinking about it for 72 hours. She's not going to talk to you, but she'll talk to me. Marcus was quiet for 10 full seconds. Then get some sleep first. Emily nodded. She left. Dolan was still in the room. He waited until the door closed, and then he looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Dolan said, "Ghost." Marcus said, "Yeah, that name is going to follow her for the rest of her career." "Good," Marcus said quietly, and he meant it completely. "It should." Outside in the corridor, Emily Carter walked toward the temporary quarters with her notes under her arm and the same unhurried, deliberate stride she had always had. Past doors, past the common room where the maintenance supervisor was now in custody, past the operations center, where Park was still running signal analysis, past the window that looked out toward the mountains in the early gray of morning. She did not swoop at the window. She had work to do. 12 hours, then the brief, then whatever came next. There was always something that came next, and the something that came next required the same thing everything else had required from the beginning: tension, patience, precision, and the particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of pressure, but from having decided long before the pressure arrived exactly who you were going to be when it got there. Emily Carter had decided that a long time ago. In a field in Montana, at a range, behind a scope, in the early mornings before anyone else was awake, when it was just the wind and the distance and the discipline of a person building themselves into something nobody could see yet. Until now. She slept 4 hours and 20 minutes. Not because that was all the time available, Marcus had given her 12, but because at the 4-hour, 20-minute mark, her eyes opened on their own, the way they always did when her mind had finished processing what it needed to process and was ready to work again. She lay still for 30 seconds, running the variables in sequence. Reeves, the tunnel network, the coordination point, the 24-hour window that was now down to 19 hours and change, the follow-on operation Marcus was building, the interrogation she had proposed. She got up, splashed water on her face, picked up her notes. The secure holding facility was a converted storage room, 3 quarters from the operations center. 2 guards on the door, camera coverage, no windows. Standard field expedient custody setup. Emily stopped at the door at 07:12 hours and told the senior guard she needed 5 minutes with the detainee. The guard looked at her. "Colonel Marcus authorized this." "Ask him," Emily said. The guard stepped away, made a call, came back in 40 seconds. 5 minutes, he said, and opened the door. Diana Reeves was sitting against the far wall with her knees pulled up and her arms crossed over them, the position of a person who has spent the last several hours deciding exactly how much of themselves they are going to allow to be visible. She was in her late 40s, silver-threaded dark hair, pulled back, the kind of face that had learned a long time ago to give nothing away. 15 years of intelligence work had built that face. It was a professional instrument. She looked at Emily. Something moved in her expression. Very small, very controlled, but it was there. Emily sat down on the floor across from her. Not in a chair, on the floor, cross-legged, same level. Reeves said nothing. Emily said nothing. 40 seconds passed. In a custody situation, 40 seconds of silence feels like a geological event. Then Reeves said quietly, "You're the shooter." "Yes," Emily said. "The pistol shot." Reeves's eyes moved over Emily's face with the particular attention of a person doing real-time assessment. "I've been running that calculation since it happened. At that distance, in those conditions, with a 4-inch target, the probability is almost non-existent." "Almost," Emily said. Reeves was quiet for a moment. "I was counting on the almost." "I know," Emily said. Reeves looked at her steadily. "How old are you?" 25. Another silence. Reeves moved her jaw slightly, the micro-expression of a person absorbing information that doesn't fit their existing model. "They sent a 25-year-old, she said. "It wasn't contemptuous. It was almost something else." "They didn't know what they were sending," Emily said. "That was the point." Reeves made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "No, I suppose they didn't." She looked at the floor for a moment. Then what do you want? The third name on the personnel list, Emily said. The one we don't have a file on. Reeves's face went very still. We have the confirmation burst, Emily said. We have the maintenance supervisor. We have the coordination point in the timeline. What we don't have is the name, and the name matters because whoever that person is, they're the one who replaced you when you moved to the facility side of this. They're running the network now, and we need to know who we're walking into at that coordination point in 19 hours. Reeves said very quietly, "You're not interrogation trained." "No," Emily said. "Then why are you here instead of someone who is?" "Because you already know what trained interrogators are going to do," Emily said. "You've been preparing for that conversation since they put you in this room. You have a strategy, a containment plan. You know exactly what to give them and what to protect." She paused. "You don't have a strategy for me." Reeves looked at her for a long moment. The professional instrument of her face was doing something it clearly wasn't accustomed to doing, genuinely working to read a situation it hadn't anticipated. "The shot," Reeves said finally. "When you took it, did you know it would hit?" Emily considered the question honestly. "I knew it was the best available option," she said, "and I knew I'd done the work. The rest was physics." "The rest was physics," Reeves repeated. Something in her voice was different now. Still controlled, but the control was coming from a different place, not professional management, but genuine engagement. 15 years, she said. "I have spent 15 years inside systems that tell me what is and isn't possible, what assets can and can't do, what margins are acceptable and which ones aren't. And you," she stopped. "And I operated outside the margin," Emily said. "Yes." Reeves looked at her. "Why, because people were going to die if I didn't." Reeves was very still. "The name," Emily said quietly, 19 hours. "After that, it doesn't matter what you tell us, because the window closes and the network disperses and the people at that coordination point disappear. And we spend the next 5 years looking for them and finding pieces. The name matters right now tonight while the window is still open." Reeves looked at the floor, a long, very long silence. Emily didn't fill it. She had learned in Montana on ranges behind scopes that silence was not empty, that the willingness to hold silence without flinching was its own form of accuracy. "Callahan," Reeves said, "Michael Callahan. He's not in any database because he's never been caught, because he's never been physically present at anything actionable. He runs coordination remotely. He'll be at the point tonight as an observer. He only shows up in person when the cash transfer is significant enough to warrant physical verification." "And this one is significant enough," Emily said. "This one," Reeves said, "is the largest single cash transfer the network has moved in 6 years. Yes, he'll be there." Emily stood up. "Thank you," she said. Reeves looked up at her. "Does it matter that I told you?" Emily thought about that honestly, the way she thought about everything. "It matters to the people who would have been in that coordination point's blast radius if we'd gone in without knowing who we were looking for," she said. "Yeah, it matters." She left. The guard closed the door behind her. Marcus had the name run through every database their intelligence partners maintained within 11 minutes of Emily delivering it. Michael Callahan, not the name he was born with, as it turned out, but the name he'd used long enough that it had accumulated real history, came back as a ghost entry in 3 separate Allied intelligence files. A pattern without a face, a methodology without a fingerprint. The kind of person who had survived 15 years in the weapons network business by understanding that the most dangerous thing you could do was let anyone see you directly. "He's going to have counter surveillance at the coordination point," Marcus said. "Yes," Emily said, "which means our approach has to be clean from a mile out." Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. Marcus looked at her. "How's your shoulder?" "It's fine." "You took a hit during the counter-sniper engagement. Harris mentioned it in his medical report." Emily blinked once. "A fragment. It's fine. Let the medic look at it before we brief." "After the brief," Emily said. Marcus held her gaze for 2 seconds. "After the brief," he agreed. The brief happened at 1400 hours. 6 operators, Dolan's element reduced from the original assault force to maximize speed and minimize signature. Emily on Overwatch, same northeast ridgeline, approach route, different final position. The coordination point was outside the facility's perimeter in a natural depression in the terrain, roughly 800 meters northwest of the original target structure, accessible from the tunnel network through a concealed exit that Reeves had described in enough detail for their engineering team to confirm against the geological survey data. The cache was going to come up through the tunnel. Callahan was going to verify it in person, and then it was going to be loaded onto transport that the network had pre-positioned somewhere in the terrain that they hadn't yet identified. "We need to be in position before the first asset arrives at the coordination point," Marcus said, "which means insertion at 2100. The window opens at 2300. We have 2 hours of setup time." "The counter-surveillance," Dolan said. "If Callahan is as careful as the file suggests, he'll have people in position before 2100. "Yes," Marcus said, "which means our insertion route is being watched before we even move." "Yes," Marcus said again, "which is why we're not using the Valley Corridor." He looked at Emily. She had the geological survey on the table in front of her. She pointed to a line on the eastern edge of the terrain. "There's a dry creek bed running northeast to southwest along the base of the eastern ridge. It's outside the sight lines of the coordination point in the tunnel exit. If we enter from the northeast quadrant and follow the creek bed west, we can get within 400 meters of the target area before we transition to open movement. The counter-surveillance will be focused on the primary approach routes. They won't expect movement from that angle." "How do you know which angles they'll cover?" Kowalski asked. "Because it's the angle I would use for Overwatch," Emily said. "Which means it's the angle a competent counter-surveillance team would know to close off. Except that angle requires a 3-person element on the east ridge to cover it properly. And a 3-person counter-surveillance element on the east ridge is a resource allocation decision. Most networks don't make it because the probability of an insertion from that vector is low enough that they prioritize elsewhere." She paused. "We're going to move like low probability looks." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dolan said, "And if they did allocate East Ridge coverage, then I'll deal with it from Overwatch before it becomes a problem," Emily said simply. Dolan looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the map. He said, "We move as planned. Insertion at 2100. They moved at 2100. The creek bed approach was everything Emily had described, covered angled away from primary sightlines, cold and rocky, underfoot in the way of dry mountain terrain at night. Dolan's element moved with the kind of professional silence that 12 years of operating together produces. No unnecessary communication. No noise discipline reminders. Just movement. Emily and her new spotter, a sergeant first class named Tron, who had volunteered when he heard what the position required, took the longer route toward the Overwatch position. Tron had 8 years of experience and had worked with 3 different senior snipers in his career. He had asked Marcus exactly one question before accepting the assignment. He had asked, "Is she as good as they're saying?" Marcus had said, "She's better." Tran had said, "Okay then," and gone to get his gear. On the approach to the Overwatch position, Tron moved behind Emily and watched how she navigated the terrain in the dark, how she read the ground without hesitation, how she selected each footfall with the instinct of someone who has spent a long time understanding the relationship between body and surface. He didn't say anything. He was a man who understood the difference between assessment and interference, and what he was seeing didn't require interference. They reached the Overwatch position at 22:18 hours, 42 minutes before the window opened. Emily went immediately to work, not setting up, not adjusting gear, but lying still and scanning, building the picture, filing everything she could observe about the coordination point and its approaches into the kind of ordered situational awareness that would let her operate without conscious thought when the engagement began. "Talk to me," Tran said quietly. 2 counter-surveillance positions, Emily said. 1 northwest, 1 south. 3-man teams, both of them. They left the East Ridge uncovered as expected. There's a waiting position near the tunnel exit. 2 individuals stationary, been there long enough that their thermal signatures are settled. They're not guards. They're handlers. They're waiting for the cache to come up. And Callahan, not here yet. You'll know him when he arrives." "I'll know him," Emily said. "He'll come in last. Verification methodology, he doesn't show until the asset is confirmed present. He'll have his own approach route separate from the network's primary elements. And he'll spend the first 3 minutes to doing his own counter-surveillance sweep before he moves to the transfer point." Tran was quiet for a moment. "You got all that from Reeves?" "From Reeves and from the file pattern," Emily said. 15 years of not being caught. You build a methodology like that through repetition. The repetition leaves a signature even when the person doesn't. Tran said very quietly, "You think like an intelligence analyst?" "I think like a shooter," Emily said. "A shooter who has to understand the target before she can engage it." At 22:47, the tunnel exit opened. It wasn't dramatic. A section of hillside that had looked like solid terrain shifted on a hinge mechanism, and three men came up through it, carrying equipment cases that their intelligence team had pre-identified as the type used for weapons component transport. Long, heavy-handled, with the care of people who understood what they were carrying. "Cache is up," Emily reported over the command channel. "3 carriers, 2 handlers moving to receive. Counter-surveillance elements are stationary." "Copy," Marcus said from the command element, positioned 400 meters away in the creek bed with Dolan's team. "Hold for Callahan." They held. 7 minutes, 8, 9. Tran said nothing. Emily said nothing. The coordination point below them was active carriers and handlers moving through a careful, practiced transfer protocol that had probably been repeated dozens of times at dozens of locations over 15 years. At the 9-minute, 40-second mark, Emily said very quietly, "There." Tran picked him up immediately, a single figure approaching from the south, moving on a route that ran parallel to the primary approach, but offset by 30 meters, using the natural cover of the terrain in a way that was practiced and automatic. "Moving pattern is consistent with the file signature," Emily said. 3 minutes, he'll do his sweep, then approach the transfer point. "Command target is on approach," Tran reported. "Marcus copy, assault elements standby." The 3 minutes passed in a silence so complete that Emily could hear Tran's controlled breathing 2 feet from her. Below them, Callahan moved through his counter-surveillance protocol with the efficiency of someone who had done it so many times it required no conscious attention. Checked angles, paused twice to listen, changed elevation once to improve his sight line on the primary approach. He never looked northeast. He approached the transfer point at the 2-minute 58-second mark, said something to the senior handler. The handler responded. Callahan reached into his jacket. "He's going for verification device," Emily said. "Biometric reader or encrypted key. Once he confirms the cache, the transfer is complete and the transport element will be called in." "Can you hold him?" Marcus asked. "I can hold him," Emily said, "but I've got 2 counter-surveillance elements and 5 additional personnel in the target area. If any of them moves toward cover before your assault element is in position, the window closes." "Assault element time to position," Marcus said. "Dolan, 4 minutes. "Hold overwatch," Marcus said. Emily held. She watched Callahan through the scope with the same stillness she had brought to every engagement in the past 4 days. Not suppressing tension, but existing alongside it, the way a person who has made peace with uncertainty exists alongside everything that can't be controlled. The 4 minutes were the longest 4 minutes of the entire operation. The transfer was moving toward completion below. Callahan verified the cache contents and said something to the handler that made the handler reach for a radio. "He's calling the transport," Emily said. "We're out of time." Marcus, assault element, Dolan in position, execute. "Execute," Marcus said. The assault happened simultaneously from 3 angles. Dolan's element moving from the creek bed, 2 secondary operators from elevated positions. Marcus had quietly staged during the hold, and Emily providing overwatch suppression on both counter-surveillance positions the moment the assault element broke cover. The South counter-surveillance team saw the movement and raised their weapons. Emily put both of them down in 4 seconds. The Northwest team had a better angle and better reaction time. One of them got a burst of fire off before Tran called the position, and Emily adjusted and neutralized both of them. That burst of fire hit one of Dolan's operators in the leg. Not a kill shot. But Kowalski went down and the assault element lost momentum for 3 critical seconds while his partner pulled him behind cover. Those 3 seconds gave Callahan time to move. He didn't run toward the tunnel exit. He didn't run toward the primary escape route. He went to ground, immediately dropped flat, used the terrain, started crawling with the practiced speed of a man who had a specific protocol for exactly this scenario. He was heading for a position that hadn't been in Reeves's description or the geological survey. A position that made sense only if you understood the terrain well enough to have identified it yourself on a prior visit. He had a bolt hole, pre-selected, probably pre-prepared. "Command," Emily said, "Callahan is going to ground, moving northwest of the transfer point approximately 40 meters. I have a partial angle." "Partial," Marcus said. He's moving into a rock formation. I have a window of approximately 2 seconds as he clears the near edge before he reaches cover. Can you take it? Emily was already running the calculation. Wind, range, target speed. Angle compression, the fragment in her shoulder was doing something uncomfortable, and she filed it. The window was not 2 seconds, it was going to be closer to 1.5 because Callahan was moving faster than his age suggested he should be able to move. I can take it, she said. She took it. The round hit Callahan in the right leg at 41 meters of crawling. He went down and stayed down, not dead but immobilized, which was exactly what the situation required, because a dead Callahan told them nothing about the network's other assets, and an immobilized one was a conversation that their intelligence team was going to have for the next several weeks. Target is down, Emily said. Non-lethal. Right leg. He's contained. Copy, Marcus said. Assault element, secure the target. Dolan's team moved to Callahan's position. The remaining network personnel at the transfer point, the carriers and handlers, were in custody within 90 seconds. The cache was secured. The transport element that Callahan had called never arrived. Their signals team had jammed the radio communication the moment Callahan reached for his device, and the transport asset, receiving no confirmation, had executed its abort protocol. The battlefield was quiet at 23:19 hours. 29 minutes after the window opened, the follow-on operation was complete. 6 operators in, 6 operators out, plus Kowalski, who was being walked to the medical element with his hand clamped over a leg wound, and a commentary about the inconvenience of getting shot that was profane enough to confirm he was going to be fine. Emily and Tran came off the overwatch position and moved through the creek bed toward the extraction point. Tran was quiet for most of the walk. Not processing quiet, he was the kind of operator who had been in enough situations that processing happened quickly and cleanly. He was quiet the way people are quiet when they're thinking about something specific. He said it at the 300-meter mark. The bolt hole, he said. You identified it. I identified the probability of 1, Emily said. Not the specific location. You had the shot ready before he cleared the near edge of the rock formation. Yes. Which means you were pre-solving for a position you didn't know yet, Tran said. You were solving for the range and angle of wherever he ended up based on his movement vector. Yes, Emily said. Tran was quiet for another 50 meters. Then I've been doing this for 8 years. I have never seen anyone pre-solve a shot like that. Emily said nothing. Is that something you learned, Tran asked, or something you... Both, Emily said. You learn the mechanics, but the speed, the ability to run the solution, while the variables are still moving, that part you either have or you don't. She paused. I've always been able to do it. I just never had a context where it mattered until 4 days ago. Tran said very quietly, Ghost. Emily kept walking. Does it fit? Tran asked. She thought about it, actually thought about it the way she thought about everything, with the kind of honesty that doesn't perform certainty it doesn't have. I've been called a lot of things, she said finally. Most of them were about what people thought I couldn't do. And Ghost is about what I did, she said. So yeah, it fits better. At the extraction point, Marcus was waiting. He looked at Emily the way he'd been looking at her for 4 days, with the particular attention of a man who was still recalibrating something fundamental and doing it honestly. He looked at the fragment wound on her shoulder that the fragment in her jacket had finally made undeniable, and he said, Medic. Now, Callahan, Emily said, is in custody and being transported. The cache is secured. The network's transport asset has been flagged and is being tracked. He pointed at the medic. Now, Emily went. While the medic worked on her shoulder, Marcus stood 2 feet away and looked at the mountain and said without turning around, the Reeves interrogation, the signal intercept prediction, the bolt hole shot, the counter-surveillance identification. He paused. You were running 6 separate analytical threads simultaneously throughout this operation. Yes, Emily said through a slightly clenched jaw, because the medic was doing something that warranted jaw clenching. While shooting, Marcus said. Yes. He turned and looked at her. Most people can't do that, not at your level, not under this kind of pressure. I know, she said. Does that... He stopped, started again. How long have you known you could do it? Emily thought about Montana, about the long mornings, about the ranges empty except for her and the wind and the distance. About the instructors who had said she had potential and the ones who had said she was too quiet, too internal, too difficult to read. and the ones who had finally eventually said something else entirely. "A while," she said. "I've known for a while." "Why didn't you say anything?" She looked at him steadily. Who would have listened? Marcus held her gaze. The honest answer to that question was the same honest answer he'd been sitting with for 4 days, and he didn't insult her by pretending otherwise. "Fair," he said. Just that one word. The medic finished and stepped back. The fragment was out. The wound was clean. Emily rolled her sleeve down with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything and stood up. "What happens to the cash?" she asked. "It goes to a secure facility for assessment and eventual disposal," Marcus said. "But the more important question is what the cash tells us about the network's procurement pipeline." Callahan is going to be a very productive conversation for our intelligence team over the next several weeks. "The third name in the transmission," Emily said. "The one we identified him as, that's an alias." Marcus looked at her. "We know. Do you know which alias we're working at?" "I use the same alias structure as the other two names in the transmission," Emily said. "The pattern is a first name derived from a common European surname and a last name that's a street name in a secondary European city. The other two on the list, I checked them against the geographical database in the intelligence package. Both streets exist. Both are in cities with populations under 300,000. Marcus stared at her. "You pattern match the alias structure from 3 data points." "I had time on the approach," Emily said. "Carter, if you run that pattern against the European geographical database and cross-reference against the watch list aliases, you'll tighten the real identity search to maybe 40 candidates instead of several hundred," she said. "It's not definitive, but it's faster." Marcus turned to his communications officer and said, "Get Park on the line. Tell him Specialist Carter has a pattern analysis to walk him through." He turned back to Emily. "After you've slept." "I've slept," she said, 4 hours. "I function well on 4 hours." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man who understood that he was having a losing argument and knew it and was going to have it anyway. Because some arguments are worth having even when you know you're going to lose them. 6 hours, he said, minimum. And the medic checks the shoulder again in the morning. Emily said, "Yes, sir." She said it the same way she said everything, clean, direct, without elaboration. But there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there 4 days ago. Not warmth exactly, not the easy warmth of people who have known each other long enough to have built something comfortable. Something sharper and more durable than that. The specific quality of trust that gets built between people who have been inside something difficult together and come out the other side, knowing exactly what the person next to them is made of. Marcus had trusted her with an authorization on a nearly impossible shot at a hostage situation. She had not missed. That transaction didn't require elaboration. Dolan appeared at the extraction point with his arm around Kowalski, who was limping with the aggressive cheerfulness of an operator who refuses to let a leg wound have more dignity than it deserves. Kowalski looked at Emily and said, "The bolt hole shot." He shook his head. "How?" "Pre-solve," Tran said from behind Emily. Kowalski looked at Tran, looked at Emily. "You pre-solved a shot on a moving target to a position you didn't know yet." "Yes," Emily said. Kowalski looked at his wounded leg, looked back at Emily. "I just want to be completely clear," he said, "that if you had been on any other Overwatch position on this mountain tonight, I would currently be significantly more shot than I am." Emily said, "The counter-surveillance team on the south had a window on your position for approximately 2 seconds before I neutralized them." 2 seconds, Kowalski said. "Yes." "Okay," Kowalski said. He said it with the particular tone of a man who has just recalculated something significant and is being very deliberate about sitting with the calculation rather than reacting to it. "Okay, good." The helicopters came at 23:47 hours. Same mountain air, same stars, the Rocky Mountains indifferent to everything that had happened in their shadow. Over the past 4 days, the same way mountains have always been indifferent, which is one of the things that makes them honest. Emily loaded last again, took the same position at the back of the aircraft. Tran sat across from her. Kowalski was already half asleep against the fuselage, which was either the body's response to blood loss or the body's response to genuine relief, and probably both. Dolan was watching Emily from 3 seats down. He'd been watching her on and off for 4 days with the particular attention of a man working something out. He caught her eye and held it for a moment, and then he gave a very small nod. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement. Something more distilled than either of those things, the specific recognition man to man, or soldier to soldier, or human to human, that says, I see you now and I should have seen you before, and the seeing is the only thing left to offer. Emily held his gaze for the same moment. Then she closed her eyes. The helicopter lifted. Below them, the Rocky Mountains held their shapes in the dark, unchanged and unchangeable. The tunnel network that had hidden a weapons cache for 6 years was being marked on maps that would determine the next phase of an operation that would outlast any of the people currently involved in it. Michael Callahan was in a transport vehicle heading toward a conversation that would occupy the intelligence community for months. And Diana Reeves, in her converted storage room at the forward operating base, sat against the wall with her knees pulled up and thought about a 25-year-old woman who had sat on the floor across from her and held silence without flinching, and who had then gone back out into the same mountain night and done what she had done, and who had not needed to announce any of it or explain any of it or receive any confirmation that it mattered. The physics of what Emily Carter had done over the past 4 days were extraordinary. 19 hostile eliminations in the original operation, 3 more in the follow-on, a cache secured, a network's primary coordinator in custody, an alias pattern identified, a betrayal exposed, 12 American operators alive. But the physics were not the most important thing. The most important thing is the thing Marcus had tried to name and nearly gotten to, and then let Emily's own 2-word answer finish, yes, sir. The most important thing is a woman who had been built quietly over 25 years into something that nobody had seen coming, and who had not been damaged by the not seeing, who had not needed the seeing, who had walked into a briefing room and a mountain and an interrogation room and another mountain with exactly the same level eyes and exactly the same calm hands, because the seeing or the not seeing of the people around her had never been the thing that determined who she was. She had always known who she was. She had just been waiting for the right distance. The helicopters landed at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, at 4:23 hours on a Tuesday morning that most of the base would never know was different from any other Tuesday morning. No ceremony, no crowd, no cameras. The kind of arrival that happens when the work that was done cannot be spoken about in public spaces, cannot be written about in newspapers, cannot be acknowledged in the ways that civilians understand acknowledgement to work. The aircraft touched down on a secondary pad. The team unloaded medical, took Kowalski for a proper surgical assessment of his leg, and within 40 minutes, most of the operational personnel had dispersed to debrief rooms, medical facilities, in the particular exhausted silence of people who have been inside something significant and are now on the outside of it and don't quite know what to do with the transition. Emily carried her own gear to the equipment bay, broke down her rifle, cleaned it with the same methodical attention she always gave it, working through the process from breech to crown with the automatic precision of someone who has done this particular thing so many thousands of times that it exists in a different category from conscious thought. She was alone in the bay for the first 20 minutes. Then Harris came in. His arm was in a sling. He moved carefully, the way people move when pain is being managed rather than absent, but his eyes were clear and his color was good. And the particular quality of aliveness that Harris carried, a slightly louder than necessary presence. A gravitational warmth was fully intact. He sat down across from her and watched her work for a moment without saying anything. Harris was good at that, better than most people assumed given his personality. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." Emily looked up, kept working. "When they told me I was being paired with a rookie for Overwatch on this op," Harris said, "I asked Marcus to reconsider. I went to him directly the morning of the briefing, and I said I thought it was an unnecessary liability, and I wanted a different assignment or a different partner." Emily said nothing. Her hands kept moving. "He didn't tell me no right away," Harris said. "He looked at your file first. Took about 4 minutes. And then he said, she stays on Overwatch. You'll understand why when it's over." Harris was quiet for a moment. "I was angry about that. For the whole briefing through all of prep, I was angry. And I took that anger into the insertion, which is the kind of thing that gets people hurt, and I knew it, and I did it anyway." Emily set the cleaning rod down. She looked at him. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know it," Harris said. "Not because it changes anything that happened. You didn't need my belief. You demonstrated that. But you deserve to know that the failure was mine and Marcus was right, and the anger I carried into that mountain was about my ego and not about your capability. The equipment bay was very quiet. The ventilation system made a low, steady sound. Somewhere outside, a vehicle moved across the base. Emily said, "Did it affect your spotting before you were hit?" Harris looked at her. "What? The anger. Did it affect your accuracy on the calls before you went down?" Harris was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I'm a professional. I don't let—" He stopped, reconsidered. "I don't think so, but I'm not certain." Emily nodded once. "Then the honest answer is that I don't know whether your belief in me affected the outcome," she said. "I ran the calculations independently regardless. But the honest question is the one worth asking, and you asked it. That matters." Harris looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" "I'm not making it hard," Emily said. "I'm just being accurate." Harris almost smiled. "Yeah, okay." He shifted his arm in the sling, the small, careful movement of someone recalibrating for a changed physical constraint. "How's the shoulder? Fine?" "Medic's report says the fragment was close to something important." "The medic's report also says it's out and the wound is clean," Emily said. "Fair." Harris looked at the rifle on the table between them. "Marcus is putting you in for a commendation." "Full citation. I've already given my statement." "I know," Emily said. "The citation will be classified," Harris said. "General population is never going to know what happened up there." "I know that too," Emily said. Harris watched her pick up the cleaning rod and continue working. "Does that bother you?" Emily considered the question the way she always considered questions, actually without performance. "My family in Montana is never going to know why I do what I do, or what it costs, or what it's worth," she said. "My mother thinks I work in logistics. My father thinks I'm a range instructor. The people who matter most to me in the world have no idea." She paused. "So no, the general population not knowing doesn't bother me particularly. It's just a larger version of something I've already made peace with." Harris was quiet for a while. Then, "Why did you choose this, the sniper track, the operational assignment, all of it? You had other options coming out of your qualifications. Better options on paper, less dangerous, more public." Emily finished the section she was working on and set the rod down and looked at him with those level eyes that had been the same across every context he'd seen her in briefing rooms, helicopters, the floor of a custody room, the back of an aircraft at 4 a.m. "Because I'm good at it," she said, "and because the work matters. And because there are people who come home because someone like me was in a position that most people never think about." She paused. "That's enough. That's always been enough." "Enough," Harris said very quietly. "Yeah, okay." And then ghost. It was the first time he'd said it directly to her. Not as information, not as a report, as a name, as the thing she was. Emily picked up the cleaning rod. "Yeah," she said. The official after-action report landed on the commanding general's desk at Fort Liberty 6 days after the operation. The general's name was Whitmore, a 30-year career officer who had built his reputation on the ability to read operational reports, the way other people read novels, with attention to character and momentum in the specific texture of decision-making under pressure. He read Emily's section of the report 3 times. Then he called Marcus. "Tell me about Specialist Carter," he said. Marcus told him. Not everything, some things lived in the classified record and stayed there, but enough. The ambush, the solo engagement after Harris went down, the pistol shot, the counter-sniper duel, the Reeves interrogation, the signal prediction, the bolt hole shot on Callahan, the alias pattern analysis. Whitmore listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, there was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to be meaningful. Then Whitmore said, "How old is she?" 25, sir." Another pause. "What do you need for her?" "Continued operational assignment," Marcus said. "Advanced intelligence integration training, and the commendation on the record at the highest accessible classification level." "Done," Whitmore said. "What else?" "Nothing else right now, sir. She's not asking for anything." "Of course she isn't," Whitmore said with the particular dryness of a man who has spent 30 years separating the people who do the work from the people who want credit for it, and has developed strong feelings about which category deserves what. The commendation went through at the end of the week. Emily signed the acknowledgement paperwork in a small office with a JAG officer present, because classified commendations require legal witness, and the JAG officer, a young captain who clearly hadn't been briefed on any context, made the mistake of looking at Emily's rank and age and saying in a tone that was probably meant to be encouraging, "Specialist, big day for you." Emily looked at him. "It's a good day," she said. She signed the paperwork. She left. The JAG officer later asked Marcus what the commendation was for. Marcus told him it was classified. The JAG officer asked if he could at least know the general category. Marcus said operational excellence. The JAG officer said for a specialist. And Marcus said for the best operator on that mountain. And the conversation ended. 3 weeks after the operation, Harris came back from his surgical follow-up with a clean report and a timeline for return to full duty. He found Emily at the range, not the operational range, the standard qualification range, where she was running drills that the range officer later described to 3 different people as the most technically precise shooting he had seen in 11 years of running that facility. Harris stood and watched for a while. She was working at 800 meters running a target sequence that required precision engagement of 7 separate aim points in under 90 seconds in conditions that included a crosswind that the range officer had been warning newer shooters about all morning. She ran the sequence 3 times. The groupings were by any objective measurement extraordinary. The range officer who had seen extraordinary shooters had given up trying to apply his standard vocabulary to what he was watching and was just watching. Harris walked up when she was between sequences and said, "You have orders." Emily lowered the rifle. When, 2 weeks, new assignment. I'm not supposed to tell you what it is, but Marcus said to tell you it's not logistics and it's not range instruction. Emily almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile Harris had seen from her, and he filed it carefully. "And the team?" she asked. "Dolan's element is staying intact for the Callahan follow-on operations. Kowalski's leg is healing ahead of Skeel, which apparently he's attributing entirely to spite." Harris paused. "They asked about you before I came here, Dolan, Kowalski, Tron. They wanted to know if you'd heard about the orders. What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd pass the message," Harris said. "The message is they want you to know that if the assignment pool ever puts you in the same operational area, they'd consider it an asset rather than a liability." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell them the feeling is mutual." Harris nodded. He started to leave, then stopped, turned back, said, "For what it's worth, what you told me in the equipment bay about being accurate rather than easy." Emily waited. "I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks," Harris said. "I think it's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this job in a long time. And I think I'm a better spotter for having heard it, which is not something I expected to say about my first operation with a 25-year-old who'd never been downrange." Emily picked up the rifle. "You called me a good shooter before the operation," she said. "When you told the sergeant major I had good hands." Harris blinked. "You heard that. Equipment bays have good acoustics," she said. Harris stared at her. Then he laughed genuinely, the full Harris laugh that filled whatever space it was in. "Of course you heard that," he said. "Of course." Emily shouldered the rifle and looked downrange. "It mattered," she said quietly enough that it was almost swallowed by the wind. "I want you to know that. It mattered." Harris was quiet. He put his good hand in his pocket and looked at the range, and then at the sky, and then at Emily, and he said, "Yeah, okay, good." He left. She ran the sequence again. 7 aim points, 90 seconds, crosswind, 800 meters, perfect. The new orders came through 11 days later. Not 2 weeks, 11 days, which told Emily that whatever the assignment was, someone considered the timeline urgent. She was briefed by a colonel she hadn't met before, a woman named Adeyemi, who ran a specialized integration unit that combined operational capability with intelligence analysis in a structure that was relatively new and still finding its operational identity. Adeyemi sat across from Emily in a briefing room and looked at her file for exactly as long as it took to read it, not performing the reading, actually reading, and then closed the folder and said, "I've been doing this work for 19 years. I've seen 3 people in that time who had the combination of capability you demonstrated on this operation. One of them is now running a program that I'm not authorized to name. One of them is in a position I'm also not authorized to name. The third one made different choices, and I'm not going to talk about that." She paused. "What I'm going to tell you is that the unit I'm building has a specific gap that your file fills exactly, and I want you in it." Emily said, "What's the gap?" "Pattern recognition at operational speed," Adeyemi said. Intelligence analysis is extraordinarily good at building pictures from static data. Operations is extraordinarily good at executing against known targets. The gap is the real-time integration, the ability to read a dynamic environment while inside it and adjust the intelligence picture as the situation develops. She looked at Emily. Most people can do one or the other. You do both, at distance, under fire, on your first operation. Emily said, "What's the structure?" Small teams, high operational tempo, environments where the intelligence picture changes faster than traditional analysis can track. You'd be embedded with field elements as both a shooting asset and an analytical asset. The role doesn't have a clean title yet. We're still building the framework. What's the expected operational cycle? Hi, Adeyemi said. I won't minimize that. The demand for this capability is significant. You'd be in the field more than you're at home for the foreseeable future. Emily was quiet for a moment, and the chain of command directly to me for analytical decisions, coordinated with Marcus's network for operational integration. You'd maintain your Overwatch certification and operational status while adding the analytical component. Adeyemi paused. You'd also be involved in training, not as an instructor in the traditional sense as a demonstrator, showing the people coming through the pipeline what integration looks like in practice. Showing them, Emily said. The instructors will do the teaching, Adeyemi said. You'd show them what the product of the teaching looks like when it works at the highest level. There's a difference. Emily understood the difference. She had spent 25 years on one side of it watching and learning from people who demonstrated capability without narrating it. She understood that the demonstration was its own kind of teaching, the kind that couldn't be replicated through explanation alone. Yes, she said. Adeyemi looked at her. Yes. Yes to the assignment, Emily said. Adeyemi was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, I expected this to take longer. You described work that matters and a structure that fits, Emily said. What would waiting accomplish? Adeyemi looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they were already fairly certain of. All right, she said. You ship in 11 days. I'll have the full brief to you in 48 hours. She stood, extended her hand. Emily shook it. Adeyemi said, "Welcome to the unit, Carter." Emily said, "Thank you, ma'am." Adeyemi was almost to the door when she stopped and said without turning around, "Ghost." She said it the way you say something you've heard enough times that it has become factual, like a classification or a coordinate. The name has already reached my network. Before I called for your file, before the orders were cut, the name arrived first. She left without waiting for a response. Emily sat in the briefing room for a moment after the door closed. The room was standard military issue, the same kind of room she'd been in dozens of times, the same walls, the same table, the same quality of silence. Nothing remarkable about the physical space. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you can feel the change in air pressure before a weather system arrives, not seeing the weather yet, but knowing it's coming. Knowing the environment is about to be different from what it has been. She picked up her notebook, stood, walked to the door. In the hallway, she passed 2 junior enlisted soldiers who were arguing quietly about something to do with a duty roster. They barely glanced at her. A specialist in uniform walking through a hallway at Fort Liberty, nothing notable, nothing remarkable. One of thousands. Invisible in the way that she had always been invisible to people who weren't paying the right kind of attention. She walked past them and out into the morning. The thing about Fort Liberty in the early morning was the sound of it, the particular combination of distant physical training, formations and equipment, maintenance, and the low ambient energy of a place that runs continuously, that doesn't fully sleep, that has the same relationship to alertness that the human body has to breathing. It just does it, without deciding to. Emily stood for a moment in the outdoor air and thought about Montana, about her mother who thought she worked in logistics, about her father who thought she was a range instructor, about the fields she had grown up in, and the distances she had learned to read before she had language for what she was doing. About the way the wind moved across flat ground in a way that was completely different from how it moved between mountain faces, and how she had spent years learning both, and how the learning had never felt like work, had always felt like the most natural extension of who she already was. 25 years old, first real combat operation, 22 confirmed engagements across 2 operations, a weapons network disrupted, a traitor exposed, 12 American operators alive, who should by every calculation have been otherwise, and a name that had traveled faster than her orders. She was not going to call her parents today. She was not going to call them and tell them something important happened, something significant, something that changed the way the people she worked alongside understood what she was capable of. She was not going to call them because the thing that had happened was classified, and the names were classified, and the location was classified, and the scope of it was classified, and even the existence of the unit she was about to join was classified. She was going to call them on Sunday the way she always did, and her mother was going to ask how work was going, and she was going to say fine, busy the usual, and her mother was going to say she worried, and Emily was going to say there was no need to worry, and they were both going to know the other one wasn't entirely in the same conversation, but they were going to have it anyway, because that was what love looked like in this particular family, in this particular life, with this particular gap between what could be said and what needed to remain unsaid. And that was going to be enough, because it had always been enough, because the work was the work, and the life was the life, and the distance between them was the cost of being exactly who she was. And Emily Carter had made that calculation a long time ago and had not regretted it and was not going to start now. At the 6-week mark, after the original operation, the sniper qualification course at Fort Liberty ran its first new cohort of the year. 42 candidates. The attrition rate for the course was historically between 50 and 60%. The candidates who made it through became some of the most precisely trained marksmen in the American military. The ones who didn't make it through went back to their units carrying the specific and useful knowledge of what the standard actually required. On the third day of the course, the lead instructor, a master sergeant named Dubrow, who had been running the qualification program for 7 years, brought the candidates to the long-range range for their first full-distance familiarization exercise. He stood them in a line and looked at them the way instructors look at people they are about to begin the process of finding out about. He said, "Before we start, I want to tell you something. 6 weeks ago, on an operation I cannot describe in a location, I cannot name a specialist in her first real combat engagement, ran a solo overwatch for 67 minutes against a prepared hostile force. No spotter, no backup, no second chances on any shot. She eliminated 19 confirmed threats across engagement ranges that most of you would not believe were operationally achievable. She identified an enemy counter-sniper who had spent over an hour building a firing solution specifically designed to eliminate her, and she outweighted him and outshot him and won. She identified a human shield situation where the only available target was a 4-inch window on a weapon frame at nearly a mile of distance in shifting mountain wind, and she took the shot and she did not miss." He let that sit for a moment. 42 candidates were very still. "She is 25 years old," Dubrow said. "She has been shooting since she was 9. She has trained in conditions that most people would not voluntarily subject themselves to for years without recognition, without ceremony, without anyone telling her that the work was worth it. She did it because she understood something that I want every one of you to understand before you fire a single round on this range." He looked down the line. "Capability is not announced," he said. "It is built. It is built in the cold and the dark and the wind and the empty ranges before anyone is watching. And it is built slowly, and it requires the kind of patience that most people are not willing to bring to a thing they cannot yet see the return on. And when it is finally needed, when the situation arrives that requires exactly what you have built, it does not announce itself either. It simply works, or it doesn't." He paused. "The specialist I'm describing did not walk into that operation and tell anyone what she was capable of. She did not argue with the veterans who doubted her. She did not seek validation from the people who had already decided she was a liability. She understood something that took most of them 10 years to understand, which is that the only audience that matters for the kind of work she does is the work itself." He let another moment pass. "Her name in the community, the name that has been moving through special operations networks for 6 weeks, is Ghost." He looked at the candidates. "You're going to hear that name. You're going to hear it for a long time. And every time you hear it, I want you to remember what it costs to earn a name like that. Not the dramatic version, not the version with a highlight reel, the version that exists in the years before the highlight reel, in the empty ranges, in the cold mornings, in the patient, unglamorous accumulation of capability that nobody sees until it matters. He picked up his clipboard. Never underestimate the quiet one behind the scope, he said, and start building something worth not underestimating. He walked down the line and the qualification exercise began. Across the base in a planning room that didn't appear on the standard facility map, Emily Carter was sitting across from Adeyemi and two intelligence analysts working through the signal pattern analysis she had started in the field and extending it now with the full database access that the unit's clearance level provided. The work was detailed and slow and required the particular kind of sustained attention that made most people's heads hurt after an hour. Emily had been at it for 3 hours. Her coffee was cold. Her notes filled 2 pages of a legal pad in the tight, precise handwriting that was characteristic of someone who had spent years recording environmental data in conditions where space and clarity were at a premium. One of the analysts, a woman named Sorensen, who had 15 years of pattern work and had been visibly skeptical of Emily's Elias methodology when it was first presented, was now sitting forward with both elbows on the table looking at the data map Emily had built across the last hour, with an expression that mixed professional excitement with something closer to humility. The fourth node, Sorensen said, you identified it from a 3-point pattern and a geographical constraint. She stopped. That's not standard analytical methodology. No, Emily said. It works though, Sorensen said. Yes, Emily said. How did you develop it? Emily looked at the data map for a moment. Wind reading, she said. Sorensen looked at her. I'm sorry. Long-range shooting requires reading patterns in real time from limited data points, Emily said. You build a model of the behavior from what you can observe, and you use the model to predict what you can't observe yet. The more you do it, the faster and more accurate the model becomes. She paused. The methodology is the same. The data is different. Sorensen stared at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and said, Okay, walk me through the fourth node again. Adeyemi, sitting at the head of the table, watched this exchange with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose instinct has been validated in exactly the way she had calculated it would be. She said nothing. She made a note. She turned back to her own section of the work. 3 hours later, when the session ended and the analysts were packing up, Sorensen stopped at the door and looked back at Emily, who was gathering her legal pads with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Sorensen said, I was briefed on the operation before you joined the unit, the written account. I thought the engagement numbers were a transcription error. Emily looked at her. They're not, are they? Sorensen said. No, Emily said. Sorensen nodded slowly. Ghost, she said the way Adeyemi had said it, as information, as fact. Emily picked up her legal pads. Sorensen, she said, yeah. The fourth node has a communications pattern that repeats on a 72-hour cycle. The next window is in 18 hours. If we have monitoring in place before that window opens, I'll have it done in 4 hours, Sorensen said immediately. Good, Emily said. She walked out. In the hallway, she passed the same 2 junior enlisted soldiers from that morning. They were still arguing about the duty roster. They glanced at her again, specialist notebook unhurried stride, and went back to their argument. Invisible. Unremarkable. One of thousands. The name had traveled across the special operations community in 6 weeks, moving through the specific channels that carry the things that matter in that world. Not announcements, not press releases, not anything that could be written down in a format the general public would ever see. Just the slow, certain movement of a truth that had proven itself completely in the field under the worst possible conditions in front of people who had started the day certain it couldn't be true. 42 sniper candidates were on a range at Fort Liberty, learning what it cost to build something worth not underestimating. A weapons network was fractured. An alias pattern was being traced. A fourth communications node was about to be monitored. A traitor was in a secure facility answering questions that would take months to fully exhaust. And in a planning room that didn't appear on the standard facility map, a 25-year-old woman from Billings, Montana, sat down at the table again and opened her legal pad to a fresh page and looked at the data with the same level eyes she had brought to every room she had ever walked into: the briefing room, the mountain, the interrogation room, the other mountain, and began to work. She had always been this. She had always been exactly this. The world had simply needed a long enough distance to finally see it clearly. And now it did, and now it would not forget. The quiet ones behind the scope do not demand to be seen. They do not need recognition to do what they do not need belief to perform at the highest level. do not need the world's understanding to justify the years of cold and dark and empty ranges. They simply build and wait. And when the moment arrives that requires exactly what they have built, they do not announce it. They deliver it. Emily Carter had delivered it completely, without hesitation, without apology, without a single moment of doubt that the work she had done in the quiet years was sufficient for the moment that finally asked everything of her. It was sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was the finest Overwatch performance in the operational history of the unit. It was the most complete solo engagement on record for a first deployment asset. It was a 25-year-old woman who had been dismissed, doubted, written off, and looked past, who had absorbed every bit of that without letting it touch the core of what she knew herself to be, and who had then, when the moment required it, demonstrated with absolute precision and absolute calm exactly who she had always been. Ghost. The name was earned, the name was accurate, and the name would stand for as long as the community stood carried forward through every cohort of candidates, every debrief, every quiet conversation between operators who had been there or who had heard it from someone who was, as the truest stories always travel, not through announcement, but through the specific gravity of a thing that actually happened exactly as told to exactly the people who needed to know it. 22 hostiles eliminated, 12 Americans home, 1 traitor exposed, 1 network broken, 1 cache secured, 1 name earned in 67 minutes of combat that the world would never know about, carried by a woman who had never needed the world to know. She knew, the work knew, that had always been enough, that would always be enough. And somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, on a northeast ridgeline that looked like nothing, in a position that the enemy had spent an hour searching for and never found, the wind still moved between the peaks exactly as it always had, indifferent, honest, and perfectly readable to anyone patient, enough skilled enough and willing enough to be still and listen. Emily Carter had listened. She